Hey Joel, here we are, and this is Joel Bocko that I'm speaking with, and let me tell you, the pleasure is all mine, Joel.
Well, it's shared tonight.
All right, well, if you insist. And I'm looking at my notes, and I was just deciding how I wanted to start. First, I'll say that you excel in a lot of ways, in my opinion. Within the Twin Peaks stuff, but also in other realms as well. And I wrote down two things in particular. I think you are both fastidious in your detail and your attention to detail, and also very inventive in your thinking. So those are sort of maybe two different sides of a coin, but I think you run the gamut. And in my opinion, that's quite the compliment. So how do you feel about that? Does that sound accurate?
Yeah, thank you for that. I think I do. I find that I try to like explore. I guess I don't know. Could we call that left brain, right brain to be
Hmm.
reductive about it? Yeah, I feel like I kind of, I guess, encourage myself, if that's the right word, to explore both of those facets in my work. I put it this way: I feel compelled to explore both. So, like for Twin Peaks, for example, it's like I really like creating things, particularly with the videos, where it has like its own sense of rhythm and kind of conveying the spirit of the work and maybe bringing other things into it as well. But then I also like to go nitty gritty into the details and figure out who's got the most screen time and things like that, and
Hmm.
playing with the sort of more trivial aspects of it. I definitely have both of those pulling me in those directions, and I fortunately I'm able to do both.
Yeah, and it seems to me that sort of one kind of supports the other, or one enables the other, or at minimum, the real nitty gritty detail stuff opens up, I think, some of the creative analysis stuff. But that's just my opinion. But I would like to start off with a semi-professional question. So I usually like do this approach where I just ask anything I want, and I'm interested in what I want to learn about. But for the first time, there are some people who said they were interested in listening to this. So now I actually have a little bit of an audience in mind. And I don't think that'll change anything, but these are my sections of questions for you. So my question for you is, how would you order these if you wanted to have like the best product that we produce?
Mm.
So I have I have questions about you and your work and like your process, how you operate basically. I have a bunch of questions that are more personal about you, maybe some background stuff, a little bit of your history or bio. Nothing too personal, I don't think. I have questions about Twin Peaks. I have questions about analyzing Twin Peaks, and then just questions about analysis in general. So if you had to predict what the listeners would want to hear at the beginning, uh, what do you think we should start with?
Um, that's a good question. Ooh, I would say probably maybe I think you kind of listed them in an order that made some sense to me, like maybe starting with the process,
Cool.
if that's all right.
Okay,
But we don't
good.
have to. I mean, by no means.
No, that's how I wanted to operate, and I was going to stick with that.
Okay,
Like
good,
no matter what you said,
good, good.
and no matter what people really wanted to hear first, because this is what I'm most interested in personally. But we'll get into the fun Twin Peaks stuff in a bit. But you sometimes post on Twitter and maybe elsewhere like screenshots of like a calendar that you create for yourself. I'm not sure if
Oh,
it's a spreadsheet
oh
or
my
whatnot,
God, a
but it's
very,
like
very
some
out of date one and over
okay,
idealistic, unfortunately.
yeah, sometimes it looks a little nutty in a good way.
Yeah.
Um, but do you really like calendar out your life or your project based life? Um, is that
Yes.
is that pretty much how you operate? Just talk about that a bit if you don't
I
mind.
would say I structure it very, very heavily. Even my daily life, I have
Mm,
like I figured out about 5 years ago that I really, to be productive in all different ways, I really needed a better like I needed to get up in the morning and feel like I was stepping onto a conveyor belt. It
mm,
would take me from thing to thing in a certain priority order. If I needed this thing, that would move to the front. Like it would almost be automatic in my mind, and there'd be penalties and stuff for not, and I found for me, I think it's worked pretty well. In terms of like a real calendar for the online work, That's reflective of the same kind of approach, but it's predictive, or I don't know if predictive's the right word. It's prescriptive, maybe. Like it's instead of saying the daily schedule is kind of reactive. It's like, if you're in this situation, this takes first priority, step into this, when you have time, do this, etc., which is a little more realistic. The calendar that you're referring to, which was made about a year ago, is already wrong in almost every respect. I just, for the life, and I've been doing this for 15 years of my online activity, I simply cannot, everything takes longer or takes a different direction than I think. And maybe because I try to order it in some way, maybe that does make it a little less chaotic or something than it would be, but it's certainly never ever seems to come to fruition the way that I'm trying to make it happen. So like that one, for just to give viewers an example of what we're talking about. So it's probably sounds kind of vague. Like I made a calendar of like, okay, I don't remember. It was something like July through September. I'm finishing this podcast. That'll come out once a week. Then I'm going to start my character series at this point, and that's going to go till then. And then I'll be done with it. And then I'll be finally ready to do my Journey Through Twin Peaks videos again, and that type of thing. Because in the past, I've done this sort of thing numerous times, and I keep thinking that I'm sort of clarifying and making it like, okay, this time I figured out what works and blah blah blah. But the problem is, it's the deadline's always at the time I want to finish it by, or the where that's always at the forefront. And so when that's the case, just practical advice to everyone, you're probably not gonna chances are you're not going to succeed. If you set it with the goal in mind, if you set it more with the process in mind, I just can't do that for various reasons. But if you set it, I think, with the process in mind of like, first I do this thing, when that's done, I do the next thing. Then you have like an orderly process that takes as long as it takes. If you try to tell yourself you're going to get things done in a certain time, I don't know. It's a risky business.
Yeah, would you say maybe you're more systems than goals, or you're more process than specific goals? Or
No, I'm more goals that just don't work.
So do you do the pros outweigh the cons? By you overshoot, or maybe you get a little over ambitious perhaps.
Oh
and then it works
yeah.
out, and then it works out how it works out. New things open up,
Sure.
new ideas. Having done this for so many years, would you say the pros outweigh the cons, or are the difficulties something that still trouble you?
I would say, okay, I'm going to take that question more as not so much about how I pursue the different projects as that I decided to pursue many different projects. I would say, I mean, in a sense, I'm glad I did. If I can get to where I want to get in the end, then it was worth it, even if it was not even if I put way too much on my plate. I like looking back and seeing a diversity of work and seeing, and really, like, I organize my site at this point because it's no longer really a blog format, even though its underlying structure is a blog template. But like, I guide people to pages that are not blog pages. So I kind of encourage them to navigate it a different way. But you can scroll back to a certain degree, and I organize it as an archive by like chapters of different like eras. And I like the fact that they all have their own little character. Like this 3 or 4 month period is very distinguishable from a 5 or 6 month period that came later. Ultimately what matters is the work. If somebody just pumps out a review of a movie every week for years on end and it's good, great. Like, but I do have a soft spot for like a terrain, where you feel like you're going up a hill and coming down and walking along a stream and this and that. And my work definitely has that, because it'll be, 1 year there'll be more video essays and this type of thing. A few years later, I'll be covering this TV show, and that will be. Now, I don't know how that works for readers, viewers, listeners, because I think a lot of people come and go. Certainly they do on Patreon. It's a bit of a revolving door, because people come for one thing and then maybe are lose interest or aren't as interested in something else I'm interested in. So it's kind of it's like a BAZAAR, bizarre type of
Hmm.
approach, where you kind of come and maybe you can find what interests you. Maybe you'll find something that you didn't think would interest you, but something else I did, and that led you to this other thing. So that's kind of my hope. I think mostly people just come for what it is, what they want to see, and certainly having Twin Peaks for the past almost 10 years has made that even more the approach, where people are coming specifically because they want to hear what I have to say about that particular show, which fortunately can provide years and years and years of content.
Indeed. So you were doing things before Twin Peaks, yes, on your channel or on your site.
Yeah, so
You've
the
been at
just
this
to
a
give
while.
you a brief history, basically in 2008 I started a movie blog called The Dancing Image.
Hmm.
Coincidentally, I saw Twin Peaks for the first time that month that I started the blog.
Oh wow.
And so I actually wrote about it pretty early on the site. I did an episode guide in 2008, and then I moved on to other things, a few Lynch films as well. But mostly the first 5.5 years, Twin Peaks was something I focused on at one point, and it was part of hundreds and hundreds of different posts about movies and all of that.
I see.
2014, I got back into the show, and that was the year that ended up with me making the Journey Through Twin Peaks videos, which are definitely by far the most popular thing that I've ever done. And that became like both a passion thing and also something I knew would draw people to the
Hmm.
site and would keep up for that reason. So ever since then, it's been at the center. But even so, like I've always been doing other things. I think the only year, I think 2014, from like September to like January 2015, it was all Twin Peaks. Other than that, well, and I guess summer of 2017 when the return was on, there was like a, from when that aired to a few months later, all Twin Peaks. Other than that, there's always something else going on.
Hmm.
Um, whether it be on Patreon, me reviewing movies every month, um, relating movies to Twin Peaks maybe, or having other series going, other shows that I'm covering and things like that. So it's almost never just been Twin Peaks that I'm putting out.
Do you? Well, I have two questions. Can you briefly summarize your various Twin Peaks projects? Because you have a lot of different things that you do. And also, my other side question is, do you have a boss? Are you your own boss? Would you like to take that in some metaphorical way? So those are my two questions.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, I'm my own boss as far as there's no hidden shadow master telling me what to do with Twin Peaks. But I guess I'm both a tough boss and maybe an ineffective one.
What makes you say so?
I yell a lot at my employee, which is myself, but don't seem to have much bark behind the bite to get things done in a different way. So, nonetheless, much gets done.
Yeah,
Just
yeah.
never quite you know on the timeline I'm hoping for. So yeah, the three big ones right now, and I would say overall these are the three big ones and have spanned years and years, and in every case at this point, are the Lost in Twin Peaks podcast, which goes episode by episode, the Journey Through Twin Peaks videos, which again are the most popular thing that I've done, and my favorite thing, I think, in many ways. And those offer like kind of a eagle eye, but also zooming in on various aspects over the whole series, the context it was created in, um, and up. I've done up to basically up to season 3, and the remaining videos are going to focus on, rather than going by groups of episodes, which is how I covered the original series.
Hmm.
It's going to look more at story areas. So like Dougie in Las Vegas, Mr. C's Wild Ride, like there'll be a video on each of those, a video chapter. So I think there's like 7 or 8 I have planned. And really, I want to get started on that, I would say in the next few weeks, because I really want those out this year. And the other projects haven't, they're still going too, but they're on a back burner. So like, I try to, I have a certain amount of time a day that I would focus on one main thing, and hopefully these videos will be that. And the third thing is the Twin Peaks character series, where I do written entries split up into different categories on all the characters of Twin Peaks ranked by screen time. And I'm up to the top 30 with that, although 45 through 31 are exclusive to patrons right now. So eventually they'd be released to the public. And I should say also the Lost in Twin Peaks podcast, that is complete as far as patrons go. And I thought presenting it to the public would be quite easy because I'm just rearranging the material, cutting it into smaller chunks that I put out on like a daily basis, and making an illustrated companion where I have screenshots and stuff that go with, you can sort of scan it as you're listening. It's organized by the categories and stuff that I'm talking about on the show. It turned out to be the hardest thing I've ever. It's harder, much harder than the videos where I'm processing all this footage and creatively arranging it. Just this simple task of combing through the audio, trying to remove the stuff that annoys me now of like, whether it be mouth noises or, volume fluctuations or something like that, is excruciating. And the illustrated stuff, going through, getting the screenshots, like I have a lot of fun doing it, but it's very time consuming. So I've had to pause 3 or 4 times just in the public release. Like, again, all the material is there. It's all done. It's endless. It drives me a bit nuts, but I really want to finish it. I've got all of season 2 left to do. Almost done with season 3. I skipped ahead to that because I wanted to hit some anniversaries last year for those episodes. But I have all of season 2 left to organize that way, and I just don't know if I'm going to get it done. I really want this to be the last year for a lot of these projects, so we'll see. But those are the 3 big ones, and then there's other stuff I've done as well.
Yeah. So how do you feel about the and whatnot, which is it's like a major part of my own personal lexicon is mumbling and bumbling. But
I'm probably
you really,
too ruthless with myself, to be honest.
Yeah, you really object to leaving any of that in. Can I convince you otherwise that
it depends. And I mean, all that stuff is there on Patreon. It's not like I've gone back, although there have been a few cases where I had to fix something in a Patreon file, and as soon as I opened it back up, it was like, oh no, I can't leave this. It's like, I mean, I don't even want to put the thought in people's heads because maybe they'll start noticing it more. If it's like mouth smacks and just like, it drives me nuts. It really drives me nuts, and it's myself more than other people. I can listen to other people do it, but I get a bit ruthless with myself, and I'm sure some people probably find it a little too clipped because it's like, I'm taking out breaths and stuff. I don't know. It may be a little over obsessive. I think for me, the podcasts are, I think I'm glad people are enjoying them. They're not really my favorite thing that I do, I will say, overall. And it's been mostly podcasts for the past few years. So favorite thing or not, they've gotten a lot of attention from me. I think that's how most people engage with media now, is through podcasts. And I kind of wanted to push myself in that direction. I'm glad I did, but overall, I struggle with it a little more than I do with video editing, for example.
Yeah, I think video essays, if that's the right term, from what I could tell, and writing seems to be your first loves, but that's just my impression. Do you tend to operate trying to please yourself or others? Do you get feedback that influences your approach, or are you pretty much just kind of doing what you want to do all the time? Like, I'm just wondering. Hold on 1 second. I'm gonna be here for a while, honey. Okay. All right. That was Maddie.
Hello, Maddie.
I forget what it was. Oh, so do you get like a lot of feedback that influences or pushes you in certain directions, or are you pretty much like, Joel decides what he wants and Joel's going to do what he wants, and you've created a life for yourself where basically you can create things all the time, and that's kind of how you operate? Is it a mix?
Yeah, it's like a weird mix of that, actually, because like I said, I mean, I'm my own boss, basically. Nobody's ever telling me what I have to do, and I've definitely followed my own drummer to somewhat, idiosyncratic effect. And I think sometimes frustrating effect. People have said like, well, gee, I just want you to, I kind of was hoping you'd focus more on this thing. And it's like, I get that, but then the passion pulls me in one direction and all of that. Now, that said, I get certain pieces of advice that have a deep impact on me. And they're sort of rare. They're like, it's the feedback, I think, it's sort of few and far between, but it's very significant when it comes. Like, I rearranged my entire site because like a few people were telling me it was hard to navigate, and it sort of became this pursuit, where now it's all visual based. Like you click on a directory, shows you a bunch of posters you can scroll through, images, for every post that you can click on, and kind of, I like that kind of approach. I hope other people can kind of enjoy it, not just functionally, but like, scrolling through and maybe finding something unexpected there and all of that. But that came about because people were telling me, just when it's a blog with the most recent thing first, and there's text directories that just list everything, and you just scroll through a block of text, they were like, I can't, I find it hard to like find things on your site. So hopefully this way made it a little, maybe it made it too complex. I don't know. But things like that, things like the Lost in the Movie's name. At one point, like I said, it was called The Dancing Image. And then I was branching off into other blogs. And one of them was called Lost in the Movies. And someone was saying, you're spreading yourself too thin, but like keep the name Lost in the Movies. That's great. And that kind of was like, oh, interesting. And they said, register your domain name. And I eventually did that and all of that. So along the way, people will sort of direct me in a profound way. I do think sort of moment to moment, it's mostly, I want to please other people, but my barometer for that is myself, which isn't always necessarily, I have kind of my own unique tastes and interests. So a lot of times what I would want to look at, which is ultimately what I'm doing, it's like, yes, it's for myself, but not really myself as a creator so much as myself as a spectator or a viewer or whatever. Like if I'm creating something, it's like, gee, if I was in the audience for this, I think that I would really want to see this. And so I do that. And whether that clicks with other people is sort of hit and miss.
Yeah, that makes sense. If somebody, well, I guess I have two questions. And the first one is like do a lot of people know, because I don't know the answer to this. Do like a lot of people like know your work, know who you are, and amongst the people who do, are they like cool people? And secondly, if somebody really wanted to look for some of the best that you have to offer, according to your own opinion, what, or maybe just like a collection of some of your best stuff, or like a diverse array, perhaps, where would you send them?
I mean, the answer to the first question in most terms would be definitely not, but I guess, it's relative. Like I said, the people seem to really like the Twin Peaks videos. They got, for me, what was especially the original ones before, I think partly before YouTube kind of messed with its algorithm, the way it used to work. I think that's part of it, but also probably because the return aired, it passed and the fever kind of broke and less people are looking for Twin Peaks content. But that first batch of videos got decent views for me. Now, for me, that's tens of thousands of views in a few cases. I think maybe just the 7 Facts About Firewalk Me video, like 200 something thousand. But there are people on YouTube who go on and they just like hit record and they're sitting there in their hoodie or whatever. And they're like, they sneeze or something and they get 10 million views that day. So, I mean, no, I'm like not even a speck in that pond. So like I said, so I'm happy with how I've been able to reach people, at least with some of the stuff. I think and those are the exceptions as well. So like normally it's like maybe a few hundred people will read or listen to something I put up. And even that kind of impresses me. I'm like, oh, where do these people come from? Because I'm not really like on Facebook sharing it with relatives and stuff. Like it seems to be kind of random people who come across it. And I like the idea that somebody's sort of wandering in the wilderness of the internet and they'll stumble across my stuff and be like, oh, this is cool. Like that sense of discovery, like finding something in an old record store or something, but I don't really know. I have no sense of my audience in that sense. I do from like communicating with individual people, especially on Patreon. But yeah, so yeah, it's all relative, but no, I mean, by most any standards, I am not, I don't have much of an audience. But then in terms of where people can find stuff, there's actually a page called the Top Post page. It has, I think, maybe 60 posts. It goes through there's a video category, a podcast category, a written an essay category, an image category. So like you can scroll through like that. And out of like, well over 1,500, probably close to 2,000 posts, And post, I use that term, but like that could be anything from a status update that's like a paragraph long to something that's like hours of video content that I just
Yeah.
happen to put up at once. So that's, but of all of that material, I organized what for me feels like the highlights of it. And that's good because some of it's very popular stuff. Some of it's stuff that like got really overlooked, but I'm really proud of. It's usually, I will say, the common thread through most of them is there are a few that are just sort of like essays I wrote about
Hmm.
a film that I'm like, oh, this one, something clicked with this. But a lot of times it's like something that has kind of a unique approach. It's like, oh, I thought of an interesting way into this that is fun for me. So I highlight that stuff. But yeah, if you it's not on the front page of my site exactly, but if you click on more to explore on that button, it's one of the first things that pops up on that page. So
Yeah, and it's interesting to say to hear somebody say, these are some essays I wrote about movies because I'm a teacher, as you know, I'm an English teacher, and oftentimes essays are things that people think are things you have to do when they're assigned to you.
yeah.
So are you kind of assigning yourself little projects, or are you writing essays because you enjoy doing that and you've managed to create a life that allows you to do things like that?
There's always some pressure involved in doing work for the site. Like there's some stuff that just sort of flies and is like a pure pleasure. A lot of the stuff, it's like I want to create content type of thing, you know.
Yeah.
Um, so there's like a mix of like feeling really compelled and sort of pushing myself a little to do it. But I think I just in 2008 I needed an outlet. I needed something to. It really was more about like expressing thoughts and ideas and all of that and feelings and impressions um, out there. And then it was nice when people came and looked at it. And I will say that's, I talked about different eras in the work. It was
Hmm.
a totally different world when I joined back in 2008. There was actually something that people called the movie blogosphere, and
Okay.
everybody read each other's blogs and commented on each other's blogs. I hardly get any comments ever now, almost never. Months and months and months will go by without anybody commenting on a piece, which, well, I mean, they do on YouTube, so there is
Right.
that, but just the energy has shifted from individual blogs to like social media websites. And I guess YouTube kind of straddles that in an interesting way. Like it still has some of
Yeah.
that spirit of like independent people creating stuff and putting it up. But like, yeah, it's that's where the action is. And so like that was a big change that sort of happened slowly, I would say in the early 2010s, where it was like one year somebody would come up with, they called them memes back then. They weren't like image posts with text on them. A meme was like, if you were like, what are 12 movies you'd want to see at this or at this, if you could program a theater or something. And all these
Hmm.
different blogs would respond and they'd all link to each other. And it was very lively and
Okay.
viral. And it seems like one year that was hopping, and a year or two later, it just was not there anymore. Now I'll go back and I'll look at my blog roll of all those different blogs. I'll scroll through, and so many of them are just dead.
Mm.
Like literally, sometimes they link like it's a spam site, like they didn't keep up the
Yeah.
domain or whatever. A lot of them haven't posted since like 2015, 2013 or whatever. So a little bit like a graveyard, but it was that was kind of the world I entered into. And then I think luckily Twin Peaks came along at a point to create a different community and sense of interaction. Without that, I don't know what direction I would have gone in. Might have just withered in a sense.
Hmm. That's interesting. So there was a bit of a heyday there. Was there ever a sort of heyday of sorts in the Twin Peaks space, wherever that might have been, blogs or
Yeah.
elsewhere?
I mean, I'm sure there certainly was in 1990. I wasn't around for that.
Yeah.
But no, definitely 2014 to 2017 was the golden age or the silver age or whatever of Twin Peaks. And I think building up to that as well, I think from the time they released the gold box in 2007, there was just a steady upswing. The Netflix streaming, it was like just in the air. It was in the zeitgeist. And then when they announced, even before they announced the return, when they were like coming out with the missing pieces and stuff, and the Blu-ray was on the horizon, there was just like a real excitement around it. And it seemed like it was back in the mainstream. And I mean, in a way, the return almost kind of exposed the underside of that, in that, after us all hyping and looking forward to it, once it's out there, it's like, yes, it has way, way more of a presence in the media than it had had for 25 years, but it was still Game of Thrones was like running circles around it in terms of attention.
Yeah.
So, there's a funny meme of like Homer Simpson looking at one TV and everyone in the bar looking in the other direction. And they imposed Game of Thrones over everyone's head and Twin Peaks over Homer's. So,
Yeah.
that this was all within a smaller context, but in a way that almost made it more exciting, because it was like a smaller group that was like even more devoted. I think a lot of people, they'll watch a big show and they'll move on. They don't linger afterwards. So the Twin Peaks community, but yeah, for without a doubt, to me, the 2014 to 17 was its cultural moment, that I lived through anyways.
Yeah. And I came around just a couple of years ago. So have I walked into pretty much like a kind of a downtime?
Relatively so, but it doesn't. So if you compare, the show was on 6 years ago now, The Return. So this is equivalent to 1990. I guess it went off the air in 91. So 97, maybe if you want to say Firewalk Me, 98. Twin Peaks in 97, 98 was nothing like, there was nowhere near the activity or relevance or availability, for that matter, in 97 or 98 that there is in 2023. So partly just because of, the internet keeping things alive in a different way than the 90s would, but also I think because The Return it was like lightning in a bottle. It was more accepted and received well by the few who watched it, even though fans had divided reactions on it. I think the fact that critics were pretty unanimous in saying this is great. Lynch got applauded at the Cannes Film Festival instead of booed and all this stuff. It's like, it was basically a success story. And I think that's left more of a glow than, Firewalk Me did, even though Firewalk Me to me is the best part of Twin Peaks. But it was just a real sour aftertaste left for people after the original series.
Yeah, I think earlier you were perhaps a little humble or downplaying the amount of work that you have produced about Twin Peaks.
I wouldn't be humble about that, because I've done a lot of work on Twin Peaks.
Yeah,
I might have been humble about how many people have seen it, but
okay, good. Because if somebody wanted to just turn to you and your body of work as a resource for thinking about, or even just researching or considering Twin Peaks from many angles, there are many, 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 many words that have been spoken and written by you. So after all of that, do you still have pleasure in watching Twin Peaks?
Yes, I get pleasure from the series, but it's evolved, and it's not the passion of 2014. I think is something different now. It's more of I've gone from the Andre Gregory character in My Dinner with Andre to the Wallace Shawn character at this point. I'm enjoying my nice cup of coffee in the morning and lingering over familiar sites of Twin Peaks versus like falling into this rabbit hole in this kind of euphoric and overwhelming way, because it's a sad story. It's dark in many ways, but that first year was like something else. It was like closer to like a religious experience in a way. And since then it's sort of been, the what follows after that spiritual birth of religion, a lot of sort of ritual building and sort of practice and reliving things and all of that, which is fine. Like I like that, but yes, it is different now. And maybe somewhat artificially, I'm trying to bring it to an end this year. But like I said, there's so much that still needs to be finished if I want these projects to be complete, that it's sort of intimidating. But yeah, I would like to sort of close off that period, which will be February of 2014 was when I picked up a book of Twin Peaks essays after not having watched the show for years, and thought, I guess this will be the next book I read. I bought it, to fill a cart on like barnesandnoble.com or something like that.
Yeah.
It was like, oh yeah, this thing's been sitting here, this used book of full of secrets. And then that everything just fell into place from there on. And so that was almost 10 years ago, and I'd like to close it within that period and move on. I mean, honestly, I'd like to move on from kind of film commentary in general and see what I can do with just focusing on certain video ideas, theoretically filmmaking, although in the
Mm.
past I've struggled with that a lot. Like I'll fill whole notebooks with notes that dance around the idea of a movie, but I can never quite plant the
Oh,
seed. So, you know, maybe after all the work on Twin Peaks, that'll be a sense of narrative will be a little more innate. I don't know, but whether that's the case, I have other, like, I would like, I think if everything could go as planned, it would be like by really November, you know, in October or so, I would finish up the three big Twin Peaks projects. I would kind of put a button in the site, say this was a 15-year project as it stands, and then I would keep it alive as something I shared almost without quite tipping my hand that everything I was sharing was old, which I kind of already do in a way. I'd post videos every week or video clips on Twitter every week and images every day from different posts that I put up over the years. And if you look at the dates, it's like, oh, this is from like 2011 or something. But
yeah.
like, I'm not like, you know, highlighting that. I'm just like, hey, here's something I watched or something I have to say about this or that. And people kind of take it I think, take it as sort of a fresh thing. So I'd like to keep promoting and maybe actually expanding it, because right now it's only on Twitter. I had a Tumblr for a while but you know, that's kind of dead. So like, I don't know, like TikTok or what are the other
You're asking the
Instagram or
wrong
something. Yeah,
guy.
exactly. Like I'm kind of stuck in the Twitter ghetto, but like I would like to promote it on all these different sites, but not actually be creating new work. But now I don't want to shut off Patreon. You know, that seems kind of unwise. People are there,
Mhm.
they enjoy the work, they make a monthly donation. So I would probably continue work on there, and I would actually make it more explicitly contingent on what people want. Like I think if I can get to a good place with these projects, I would sort of take a deep breath and like poll people, send them DMs like, hey, what are you looking for from this? Like, what can I, and kind of tailor it explicitly to like, okay, these are your rewards for the $1 a month or $5 a month each month. So
Mhm.
I guess I would continue, because I assume this is what they would want, some sort of maybe even Twin Peaks commentary over there. But like it would, you know, I wouldn't be putting out new public projects. I'm already kind of ending some of the feeds, like finding a good spot to kind of conclude various podcast projects. And then I would like to focus my energy, you know, my energy for new work on uh well, one of the ideas is like a generations project. I have no idea if this would work or not. Like it could
Mhm.
completely crumble to dust in my hand. I really don't know. And I wouldn't be surprised if it did, because it's a bit nebulous and grandiose at the same time. But it's this idea of like looking at different eras through the lens of the generations that were, you know, alive at that time and what ages they were. And then you can kind of map it on. Like there's a bit of a mathematical grid aspect to it, because it's like each generation is exactly 17 years. Each era would be 8 or 9 years. So you can almost say, let's jump in right here and look at where the boomers were in this time and where the millennials were here. And you can actually juxtapose side by side. They were 26 to 43 and at this exact time, you know, that type of thing.
Mhm.
But doing a video form of it, I already did a post where I did this with just images. It's sort of just introduces the whole concept and has like, you know, an image for each era and tells you how old each generation was at that point. I
Yeah.
used actors to illustrate it because it's hard to find pictures of like normal people and know exactly how old they are. So it's like, you know, but this post has stuck with me. It really has been hard to shake. And so I thought, wouldn't it be interesting to go through YouTube? There's tons of footage on YouTube that you can just pull off of videos, basically, just rip off, which especially now with Netflix DVD going away, I mean, that's another end of the era moment of kind of sounding the bell of like, I can't quite do things the way I used to, because that was a major resource for me. But anyways, so yeah, this would be like going through and finding interesting footage from a given era, usually that would reflect some kind of generational experience or conflict or growth or whatever, and weaving a kind of journey through Twin Peaks like narrative through that. And I would like to go do it backwards, start with the most recent era. Maybe even, maybe I would spend years putting this together. And we're currently, according to my my charting of this, we're now at the beginning of the next period, which is 2023 to 2031. It doesn't have a name yet. Nobody knows what it's, I would call the previous one with 2015 to 2022 is MAGA Meltdown. I mean, that's kind of a no-brainer. That was what was going on in society, I think, as many other things kind of revolved around the persona of Trump and how people reacted and all of that. And then before that, the period 2006 to 2014, I'd call I world, lowercase I, like the iPhone, kind of defined that way. And then millennial crisis, the late 90s into the turn of the millennium, and 9/11 and the war on terror and all that. So like each era, even though it's done almost not arbitrarily, but like just the hammer comes down, like, okay, 7 years have passed or 8 years have passed, end of era, start a new one, 9, so forth. It's funny how it does actually map on to different periods that have a distinct character. And same thing with the generations. It's like, well, how do you distinguish, at a certain point, somebody born at 1159 is Gen X, and somebody born at midnight is a millennial. So it gets kind of ridiculous. But just broadly speaking, you can look at these big groups and see kind of patterns that emerge and things like that. So yeah, my idea is to kind of play with that. Again, I'm not putting too much stock in the sense that none of this that I'm describing to you right now is pinned down in a way. I do take some encouragement from the fact that, Journey Through Twin Peaks had a similar genesis in that I had this desire to sort of, and keep in mind, this is before season 3. And there's a sense that Twin Peaks is sort of an unruly mess. It doesn't quite cohere. And I wanted to kind of take it all in my arms and show the big picture, the God's eye view of like, what Twin Peaks builds toward, which in my mind is Fire Walk with Me is sort of the culmination of that. And actually I've struggled a little bit with how to fit season 3 into that, because to me, it all kind of ends up still pointing back to what came before in a way. But I wanted to do that. And initially that was going to be a written thing. And I would say essentially turned into Lost in Twin Peaks in some ways. Although Lost in Twin Peaks is very granular. It's not taking as much time to look at the sweep the way Journey Through Twin Peaks does. And so I had this idea. And then I also had the idea, I was starting to do video essays again. And I was like, gee, it would be cool to do like little Twin Peaks video essays, like sort of riffs on ideas. And I had 3 visual ideas that were really driving me. One of them was Laura Palmer at the near the end of Fire Walk with Me, getting up from her desk and crying, and then cutting into the pilot and just seeing how that would look. And actually, that's the most recent video clip I put up on Twitter. Another one was playing the home, like zooming in on the home video image that we mostly only see on the TV, and kind of filling the screen and playing Mysteries of Love. And I thought that would be kind of cool. And then the other one was John Thorne's idea about how the dreams of Deer Meadow, in his theory, that if that first part of Fire Walk with Me is Cooper's dream, that it echoes, or it's echoed by Laura's dream later in the movie. And I thought, wouldn't that be cool to just have a split screen side by side and show images from both that kind of rhyme in that way? And those were the 3 ideas. And somehow that concept of doing a video exploration of, or just like a video kind of playing around with Twin Peaks stuff, combined with this sweeping idea of kind of telling the story of Twin Peaks, both the story it tells and the story about it and how it, accidentally came together. And I thought, I kind of played around a little, and I was having some trouble in Final Cut Pro, and I was just like, I don't think this is it's too unwieldy for a video essay to do, but I couldn't let it go, and so I ended up starting it, and it all kind of fell into place, and that became Journey Through Twin Peaks. Was like the combination of the visual spark and this grand concept, this more grand conceptual idea. So I know that I can go from something seeming kind of vague and nebulous. Now, a big difference is with that, I had the core, footage of Twin Peaks to work off of, to bounce off of. With this idea, it's more unmoored. It's like go out and see what I can find and coalesce it into something. But anyways, that was a long, winding thought process.
Now, what do you see on my screen right now?
I see Journey Through Twin Peaks, the playlist.
Yeah, and I want to watch just a minute or two.
Sounds like you've been snacking on some of the local mushrooms.
There's the old website.
Yeah, still the same one, but it'll redirect you to lostinthemovies.com. Yeah, exactly. It's interesting because that trailer was created after all of the videos were complete. So, as I was doing it, I had a plan going in and I had an outline, but of course things get expanded, things get added. So it's a good thing I waited till the end to make a trailer, because it probably, would have shown stuff that ended up being a little different. But like even sequences that illustrate certain questions or stuff are like sequences I cut for the video for other purposes. So like when it's saying who killed Laura Palmer or whatever, and it's showing all the characters, that's actually a montage that I cut when I'm talking about the town in chapter 1 and saying everyone has secrets and this and that. And it's like cut to the rhythm of my narration or whatever. So it's not, no, it's cut. I think it's exact. It's like a second each or something like that. So, it has another reason for being cut that way, but it's kind of dropped into the trailer. So like nothing, the trailer is like an assembly of sequences that themselves were cut for other things.
If you had to name the genre of what we just watched, would you say that is a film trailer, an essay trailer, a video essay? Is there a name you would give it?
Yeah, I'd call it a video essay trailer, because it's a trailer for a video essay. I don't think it's meant to really function on its own, other than maybe, pleasurable to see the images of Twin Peaks and hear the music and all that. But in terms of what it's conveying, it's leading you towards the rest of the series.
When you create something like this, or perhaps even some of the videos in that series, are you kind of following a template, that like a commonly used approach? Is there sort of like a standard approach, or are you kind of making it up as you go, or do you have like a certain approach that is kind of more your style? Even just the one we just watched, is that kind of a Bocko-esque, so to speak, or is that sort of more like standard format? Because I don't know.
Well, it's because it's a video series, it makes sense to have a trailer. I'd have to think about how many or what examples of video essay series are out there, because it's not really that many now that I think about it. I haven't really thought about it in that way before, because initially this was going to be a 20-minute video essay for all of Twin Peaks, and it became a 4-hour video series that I had to split into different parts. So it's like,
okay, so that right there tells us something about you.
Yeah, that's kind of an example of what I was talking about before.
Yeah.
Everything is always ballooning, but yeah, it's just actually interesting to think about. So I'm not, I'd have to like kind of look into it and also figure out, is this something I saw or just was kind of drawing from a common thing? Because certainly in terms of like specific video essay making, I wasn't like a huge watcher of video essays, but I'd certainly seen some, and I was familiar with like Kevin B. Lee, for example, who basically invented the form, and really fascinated by what he was doing. So some of that was like internalized and then would express itself in there. I don't know that I was like consciously like, here is a template I'm following, so much as just having a general, like I said, like I sort of digested a sense of how these things could be made, and then instinctively just sort of work with those parameters. I think it's like that with any kind of form, you know, we, especially if it's something that really clicks with us. And this is interesting for you because you're actually your job is to be very conscious of these things that people often take for granted. So you have to kind of engage with it on that level. I think in general, people usually don't even realize quite how they're operating. They're like semi-consciously following like something that makes sense to them, but was assembled over many different experiments and forays and everything like that.
Yeah, and my students right now are in the middle of a multi-genre project where they have to basically do a bunch of variations on a theme, so create a bunch of pieces in different genres, and they're supposed to at least research and study the genre to a degree that they can kind of enter into it consciously or at least effectively. Yeah. So that's pretty interesting. And so you're definitely dipping your foot into a stream that's already flowing with the video essay thing.
Yeah, I mean, at this, so the video essay form, you know, and obviously there's earlier things like essay films and even documentaries about movies that kind of informed what was possible. But in terms of the video essay as we know it, and this might actually be sort of out of date because I'm a little out of touch with this world for probably about 5 or 6 years at this point. And I have noticed just casually, people use video essays now to refer to like really any kind of online video that is exploring a subject. Sometimes they'll use that to refer to like sort of talking head stuff. Sometimes they'll use it to refer to like what I was doing here, but with much less of an emphasis on using footage particularly from a movie. When for many years, at least as I saw it used, video essay was used exclusively to refer to taking footage from a movie, or I suppose a TV show, as I did in this case, and usually narrating over it, although there were non-narrated forms of it as well. And that was a video essay. So it's kind of interesting to see now that the term has evolved to the point where it doesn't even need to be about a film or use film footage to be talked about as a video essay.
I see. So the video essay was pretty much born in the context of film analysis.
What was specifically, I think you really can credit it primarily to one person, which is Kevin B. Lee. In 2007,
and I have his name written down. I wanted to ask you about him. Can you, because I've heard you mention him a number of times, including to me, as somebody admirable and somebody you personally, I think, learned from. Just tell me a little bit about him. And you don't have to do the bio, but just like some things that you've been inspired by or learned from, admire, etc.
So in 2007, he basically he was running a website that was called Shooting Down Pictures. It was off of the list. There's a website called They Shoot Pictures, Don't They?, which has like aggregated all the critical reviews and top 10 or top 10 lists and things like that to determine what are the most acclaimed films of all time. And so they had a list of the 1,000 most acclaimed films. And he had a project as like, I think at this time, like a 30-year-old cinephile, kind of bored with his job and trying to find passion and other things. He was like going through all of these films, the ones that he hadn't seen, and watching them for the first time. And at a certain point, it was like, it wasn't enough for him to just write about it. He was like, you know, I'm online. YouTube had just come in like maybe months before.
Okay.
It was brand new. And he was like, I need to show clips from what I'm talking about. So he would assemble the clips and show them in the midst of the blog post. And then, and you know, hopefully I'm representing this accurately, but I believe the next step was like, well, why just have the text and then stopped for a video. I mean, if it's almost be like a film commentary where you're talking on the soundtrack and talking about things, but because you can manipulate this, because you have editing software on your computer, you have YouTube to upload it to, you have DVD ripping technology that you can pull the footage off of the film. Why not actually assemble the clips in a way that sort of benefits your argument or what you're trying to point out about the film? And that to me at that time was, I think around then, 2007, 2008, I sort of saw these first ones that he had made, and it was like there was something revelatory. It sounds probably really obvious in retrospect, and especially to somebody listening to this who's like 20 or something, they've just grown up with this being a thing there. But to be like, wow, you can like assume control of the images in a movie and order them in a way that you want to order them in. And this also, I think this part of it, the aesthetic part, grows out of a long tradition of like, they would do this particularly with anime. I can't remember what the term is called, but they would basically assemble clips from favorite animes and often make some sort of point through the montage, like often about like characters and how they really felt about something. Like they'd cut together all these reaction shots and stuff. So there was like, this was going back to the 90s, people doing VHS decks to this. So there was that kind of fan history. There was a critical history of, I think DVD commentaries were kind of the closest analog to this. And he really brought them all together in this way and started using it for this project. And then other people got into it. They started doing it. It became like this communal thing. And eventually websites were launched that were kind of primarily focused on this. And he was at once like a pioneer of the form, a master of the form, and a like meta commentator upon it. Like he could see its limitations and its potential in a way that usually is reserved for people who aren't doing the thing. They're standing to the side as a critic. He was like critic and creator all at once, which makes sense because it's a forum that combines criticism and creativity. But yeah, I would point people, I have interviews with him from like 2015 where we talk about some of these bigger themes of video essays and stuff that and there's lots of examples in there of people's video essays, including his. So yeah, he's a fascinating figure, and he has sort of moved into academia, I think, exclusively, more or less. Like, again, I've fallen kind of out of touch with the video essay world. For a while, he was the editor of Fandor, where I would sometimes publish video essays. So I had a lot of communication with him through that. And then when that all fell apart, it seemed like he was already pursuing very advanced studies. And I think he's a professor now in Germany. That was the last I kind of was following. That was where he was doing. And so he's really, I think, teaching audio visual essays as like a kind of a form unto itself at this point. But yeah, anyways, there's another long answer.
Yeah, that's cool. No, I appreciate that long answer. And as a very brief side note, I don't know a lot about Fandor, but I do know that my wife and I watched one of your Fandor videos on Back to the Future. Very cool.
Oh yeah, that was a fun one.
Yeah,
that's like, that was funny because I never could figure out the secret sauce for going viral. Like there were videos on there on Fandor that got millions of views. They hit. In fact, Kevin B. Lee has a great story where they hired him to make video essays about their catalog, and they had a lot of obscure indie foreign films that weren't going to get a lot of views. So he was sort of diligently making these videos about those. And they're like, man, this isn't like, it's not going anywhere. People aren't clicking on these. And it's like, well, this is your library. And they said, well, do something more popular. Okay. So I thought, well, okay, well, let's go for the rafters on this. I'll do a video on Spielberg. So he did this whole video called the Spielberg face, where it's like shots of the characters staring up in awe, and this essay that he wrote describing, what this particular shot was. So he uploads this to Fandor, and an hour later, they call him into the office. They say, Kevin, I'm sorry. We've been thinking about this for a while. We got to let you go. This isn't working out. Like, they hired him full time to be doing this, and they're like, it's just not happening. and he was devastated, and he went home or he went out to lunch or whatever, and suddenly his phone started blowing up, and they called him back in the office like, oh my God, what happened? The Spielberg face had gone viral and gotten like 2 million views in like 4 hours or something like that.
Yeah.
So suddenly they brought him back and he was there for another 5 years. But yeah, so there were videos on there, and there were other people who were like masters of it. Like just something about their style, their touch would instantly, whether it was people on Facebook scrolling through and just stopping, like, oh, I got to watch this. I never figured it out. Like the most, I think the Back to the Future is probably one of the ones that got more. Actually, there were ones that got even more views than that, and like sort of almost accidentally, like the ones that I didn't think would. But it would be maybe in the tens of thousands at most. Like they just, it's something didn't quite translate. So I don't know that they ever got their money's worth, because they paid pretty well for video. They paid decently, I thought, at the time. But I always thought, I don't know how this model is going to work, because where are they making money from? I mean, that's so true with all of this online tech stuff. So I never looked. I think there were people who were kind of shocked when it all fell apart, and actually they really got screwed, because they didn't get paid for their last few videos. Like the company just literally dissolved into air. And
Wow.
I was not surprised that it ultimately went that way, because I just was like, how is this a business? I don't know. I mean, I'm glad to take the money and do the work, and I'm earning it in the sense that I'm, creating things I thought were pretty good and all that. But in terms of generating revenue for them, I don't understand what the equation was there.
Yeah, no, that's something I know zero about, like basically how people create art or content, for lack of a better word, on the internet that's enjoyable and get paid for it. I don't know much about that, but
Yeah, that
one
was
thing
my only brush with that, and it was very much on the periphery.
do you ever do any, like what's the word I'm looking for? Like for hire stuff, like freelance stuff?
The last thing I did, I think, was 2017, where someone very nicely put me in touch with like a publisher of some sort of journal, and I wrote an article about Mark Frost and Twin Peaks, and it was like $75 or something. I don't quote me on that. Maybe it was more, but it was a small amount. But it was sort of a professional. Could you write about this subject? And I did that, and that was nice. But that was it. That was the last time I had any sort of other than Patreon, other than being paid directly by the people who were looking for it. That's sort
Yeah,
of my only professional
yeah.
experience of the last 5 years, if you could
It's
call it
it's
that.
yeah, it's always interesting to think about how people could, because you have such a, I would say you have a pretty significant skill set, and then how these skill sets could travel throughout the world. There's so much I don't know about. Um,
Yeah,
one thing
me
that
either.
one thing that Kevin Bealey said that matches one of the questions I had here was how he talked about both like the costs and affordances, like the highs and lows of the video essay genre. And my question for you was, do you think this genre will have a significant historical legacy? What do you think the legacy will be looking backwards? Do you think what do you think it will be known for, or will it sort of fizzle away?
Yeah, I mean, like I said, it's hard for me to really get a sense of it now, because I hardly ever watch any of them. And actually, I've made a point not to watch the Twin Peaks ones until I'm done with Journey Through Twin Peaks, which is a never-ending goalpost that keeps shifting. But there's some I'm really curious to see. Like I love Jeremiah's commentary and stuff that I've heard him give, and I get the sense like I'm gonna really enjoy those videos when I see him. But I've sort of held off. I certainly held off on the big, the one that went mega viral.
Yeah,
Again, something I can't. I mean, I get in his case how it did. I'm talking about the what's his name?
yeah, the Twin Perfect one.
Twin Perfect. Yeah. Where it's like you put the big caption, "I've figured out Twin Peaks" or something, and it's like, if you're willing to piss a bunch of people off, you can go viral. So like I kind of get it in a vague sense, but I don't really, know how to totally make that work for me. But yeah, so like I haven't watched that one yet either, and that, but just in general, I haven't really. I think since the Fandor thing ended, and I kind of got sucked into Twin Peaks and Patreon consuming most of my energy, and I guess arguing about politics on Twitter or whatever. It's
Yeah.
like, I basically stopped reading books in 2016. Like some around that time, just my consumption and engagement patterns shifted. I think in a mostly productive manner. I mean, my workload just exploded after that in terms of what I was throwing myself into and publishing.
Hmm.
Way more, like if you were to go through, like, look at my site like an hour a day or something in chronological order, I think the part from 2018 to now would be way more, it would take way more of your time to look at than the 10 years before that, just partly because it's podcasts, they're longer, but there was also a lot more stuff being put out and then being re-released in a public forum in a sort of jested way. So anyways, I don't even remember how I went down that particular path. We were talking about video essays. Yeah. So I'm not as familiar with the forum at this point. My guess is they will be of interest in sort of representing this era that I feel is sort of waning or has waned, of like the kind of wild west of the internet, where it was like people had this freedom to kind of experiment with different forms and make things their own. I think that's the big thing, is there was like a real empowerment from like the late 2000s to like the mid, maybe even late 2010s, where it was like the mainstream cultural dominance kind of broke down, and everybody was kind of getting in on the game and could publish things and see. I mean, I even remember Twitter 10 years ago. You'd pop into like a celebrity's replies and they'd respond to you, that doesn't happen anymore. I mean, it's become, they sort of figured it out in a way, and they made it more stratified. And I don't think it's fully that way, but it does feel like we sort of peaked and are on the other side of that peak. And I think video essays from the 2010s anyways will be an example of that, of people taking this kind of cultural currency and putting their own imprint on it.
Yeah, that's interesting. Have you ever been asked for your autograph?
No.
Okay.
I can't even. Yeah, I don't even know who would who would be asking me for it, I guess, in this scenario. Like
probably Twin Peaks fans. Like when I first
through the internet, like somebody would like, because certainly nobody I would run into in my life would even have heard of Twin Peaks for the most part, let alone know that I'd written anything about it.
Yeah, fair enough. I could relate. I actually have kind of acquired a friend, a Twin Peaks friend.
Nice.
And so now I get text messages and we can text each other.
Nice.
And it's like like world bending.
Yeah, isn't it? It's like
the only person
colliding.
I knew. Yeah, my wife and I watched the whole series and we loved it together.
Yeah.
But
it's a niche thing.
Yeah,
but it's funny. It's like
it's
the perfect size in a way, because it's niche, but it's not like uber niche. Like there's things I'm into where it's like almost like depressing to think of like this is so obscure, this thing that I really like, and that's fine in and of itself, but you're losing a sense of like participating in something like a mass culture thing. And Twin Peaks can give you that, even though it is really low on the totem pole of like cultural things that get a lot of attention or whatever. It's like big enough that there's like a thriving fandom, and you can dive in and not feel like you're just over in the corner with like two weirdos, talking amongst yourselves. It's like it's big enough and small enough at the same time.
Yeah, it's big enough where people would recognize it, but small
enough where if they're into it, they might recognize you. Like,
exactly.
You're another person who's into this thing. Which
it
would never happen with like Marvel or something, like you'd have to
precisely
really climb, and you'd probably have to do so by like slavishly pursuing access to the creators somehow.
Yeah, it's true. Well, I like to exist in little worlds where, um, I could actually get responses from the mini celebrities within those worlds.
Yeah,
Like,
that's true.
I contacted you on Twitter, I guess, pretty early on after I joined, and I'm like, oh wow, this guy wrote me back. That's cool, And then basically, like, all
That's
these different,
flattering, but
yeah,
but
all these
yeah.
different people contacted me back, and then I'm like,
Well,
this is
yeah.
about the size I could handle.
I think of
That's
how
it.
like the actors and people are very responsive, and even Mark Frost.
Mhm.
I mean,
Yeah,
David Lynch is sort of on his own cloud, which is appropriate, but Frost will like and retweet things, and people like Amy Shields or shoot, the actor who plays Ray,
yeah, George, yeah,
George
George Griffith,
George Griffith. I was
yeah,
going to say Galloway for some reason.
yeah,
George Griffith, of course. Yeah. Like they're like really excited. Like the actors, I think, have the same experience we do, but like even more heightened because they're on the set and oh my god, I'm now a part of this thing.
yeah,
But like
yeah.
it's this thing. They have these long, for my character series, I do an actor bio for every entry,
Mm,
and it's funny. Like these people are in sometimes hundreds and hundreds of TV episodes and movies. This is just one little blip in their career, but it's like coming up for air for some of them. You know,
yeah, yeah,
they're just like, oh, wow, this is how things can be. It's like they fell sideways into this little universe and they never let go. Like the people who would go to the fest year after year after year, and it was like part of their like identity. They would show up and celebrate with these fans in like a small town. It's like it's I don't know, yeah, it's kind of beautiful.
it is cool. Yeah, so one of the people that I've been texting with and really have a great time communicating with online and, like, privately as well. His name is Joseph, and he goes by Worlds in Wires on Twitter and I think
Mm.
elsewhere. And he had a couple questions for you that he wanted to ask. And one of them was, do you did you have any plans to ever make a short film or a long film? And
Yeah,
I think you touched on that briefly.
well, I actually do have one on the site, sort of official part of the Lost to the Movies canon called Class of 2002, which I've also
Mhm.
posted video clips from on, mixed in with the video essays that I do every week. That was an interesting project because it was, um, I you do a whole thing about that, so I'll try to keep it light. But basically, around 2012, I just moved to California. I really wanted and needed to make something like that's that sort of compulsion of like this is the point. Like I'm in my late 20s, like I need to and I'd done some like short film projects in the past and stuff, but this was something where it was like, okay, I'm here. I need to do this kind of just on my own, however I can do it while working, doing all this other stuff. And somebody suggested an idea of like people waiting for a train in the afterlife, and they were like, just take it. I'm not going to do anything with this if you can think of something. So I kind of played around with that for a while, and I kept writing things and the dialogue wasn't really clicking. And at a certain point I was like, I want to open this with a montage of like whoever the actors I get to play them, of like their images from when they were younger, because the idea, again, I don't know, I think I said this, like the characters are dead who are like waiting for the train or whatever. This is like, and I kind of hit on the idea that they were all classmates who had died at different points in the 10 years since their graduation from
Mm,
high school. And so I had these characters very early on, like the 5 characters and who they were, but I couldn't quite figure out how I wanted to tell the story, what was practical to do. Like, was I going to rent a vehicle? Like, how was I even going to do this financially? And I thought, well, whatever I do, I want to open it with this montage of like their earlier lives and describe who they were up to this point. And as I sort of developed that, I realized like this was the thing I wanted to do. Like the rest of it wasn't as interesting to me. It was like actually using images and telling the story. So I ended up basically getting actors through lacasting.com, who just, and I didn't even have to get a SAG contract. I actually asked about them, like, is this a thing where it's like, well, no, they were sharing their own personal pictures from their past. and I was using them to illustrate these characters that I'd written. So it ended up being this basically mock documentary, but very not like a comedic one, telling the story of these 5 people who had died and were all sort of circling around this one character who's telling the story, and it's sort of revealed how intimately involved he was with at least one of them. And that became like this 20-minute video that in many ways is like a video essay. It's fictional, it's a film, and actually that was an interesting experience. Is, you know, not that many people have watched it. It doesn't have a lot of views, but like people who did, several people said that they thought it was real, which was interesting. I mean, it was a little horrifying in a way of like, oh my God, like what have I created? What's this Frankenstein monster I've created? But flattering too, that because there's a lot of structural conceits to it if you look for them. But if you're not looking for them, you probably, like, all the characters have a J in their name. There's like playing games with the number 10 and stuff. And there's actually like they're very loosely patterned on characters from the book of Genesis, specifically the Jacob and Esau story. So there's like sort of all these hidden streams underneath it, but it's telling a fictional story. So that's I guess my answer is yes, I have done that with that film. And that's pretty much, there's like one other experimental film I have with like footage from Wind in the Willows and stuff that I did many years earlier and popped onto Vimeo and shared on the site. But for the most part, that's the only real film that I've featured on there, class of 2002.
And earlier you were talking about filling notebook pages with potential ideas. For
feature films that I could shoot, like with actors and stuff, like as an actual production. And I just, I never quite felt like I had that hook, like, you know, Twin Peaks, the girl washes up on shore, the town grieves, and a detective comes to town to solve it. Bam. Everything else can kind of spin around that. You can have a woman who's got the shades that won't open, you know, it's like you have all these other little elements, but there's a core thing there that holds it together. I would have like a very loose conceptual thing, like, okay, like here's a character who's like a psychologist who is exploring this dream world, and it's like a noir film, but the character's a psychologist instead of a detective. And I would have all these tons of ideas I was building off of, like Raymond Chandler stuff, but there was never like the one sentence pitch thing of, and here's the central plot engine or the thing. Somehow it was like always a part of just, I feel, a larger sort of creative block I have with coming up with things out of thin air. Like I'm so reactive. That's why the film commentary stuff has worked so well for me, because there's something there to fuel me. There's the spark is already there. Coming up with the seed to me is just the hardest part, and everything else after, as challenging as it can be, is you know, you're flowing, you're moving, the engine started. I just getting that engine started is rough.
I understand completely. My brother, who's probably the funniest person I know, he claims that I am one of the funniest people he knows, and no one else would say that about me. And you know, but it's just that if I have some sort of person to riff with,
that's a good point. Yeah,
and it could just happen. But if I have to sort of create comedy from scratch, it's probably not going to happen at all.
Yeah, so it's interesting. It's like I'm a very sort of independent, individualized creator, and that's not to say that I haven't had many great interactions. That's to talk about John Thorne, Kevin B. Lee, all these people who have fueled things for me, but I'm sort of reliant on myself to jumpstart stuff, and that ends up working out pretty well for film commentary, video essays, etc., and not great for filmmaking, I find. But if it ever does coalesce, then that's sort of a good place to be in, because now you're not dependent on somebody else's you carry around your own equipment with you that you need, basically.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think one of the reasons that Joseph asked that was, I think he just admires your work in general. He's also a filmmaker, sound designer type guy. Just general
Nice.
artist
Yeah. I've
type.
interacted with him
And
on Twitter, and he's
yeah, that's
I
cool.
think follows both accounts.
And would you say you're an artist?
Um, I guess in the sense of like I can be like I've been an artist. If it's like
Mm.
a present tense thing, I might get a little like, are you doing, are you doing something artistic right now? It's like, I mean, there's creative aspects, certainly the stuff I'm doing, but because it's like sort of more of a critical component to it, it's a little like, you know, what does he say in The Big Lebowski? Not a term that I'd self-apply or something like that.
Mm.
It's like I think it can be, but like to use it as I'm always in that mode, I don't know.
Would you say
I would
the
aspire to be, I guess, but
okay? Would you say the critical work or the essay type work or just a lot of the writing you do in general, does that fall under the umbrella of art?
um I mean I think
I'm not trying. I'm
I
not.
think
I'm
it's
not
on a
trying to make that a
spectrum.
loaded word or
I
anything.
think it's on a spectrum. I mean, there's like, an art or craft of writing that a critic
Mm-hmm.
engages in. I also don't even know that I would necessarily call myself a critic in that way
Mm-hmm.
either. I'm sort of hesitant. Like I've been a critic. I am in critic mode sometimes. Sometimes I'm in critic mode and artist mode at the same time, along with other modes. Like, but it's hard for me to just put on a hat and say, this is the thing I am. It feels a little like, I think, because of the way I do it, it would feel a little pretentious for me of like I'm claiming something that I'm not necessarily like in the world of in the way that people who claim it normally are, maybe. Yeah.
Would you identify yourself as like a creative type?
Yeah,
Um,
definitely.
are you?
I think I can use these terms as adjectives. I have a little trouble using them as nouns.
I see. Speaking of adjective, which of the following are more accurate? Are you unapologetic, purposeful, or fill in the blank? Which would be the best adjective for you?
I'd need a context for it.
Okay,
I would have to like, in which situation am I this thing,
I see.
that type of thing.
How about as Joel Bocko, the creative type?
What's a one word or
Yeah,
choosing
I
between
was
those two
wondering if you would
words?
describe or would you describe yourself as unapologetic, or is that not a word
No,
that
not
sits
really.
with
I
you?
mean, not maybe in certain situations or contexts, but um I mean, one of my major problems in writing that I have to correct for is using hedging my bets,
Okay,
using what's the word I'm looking for? You'd know
qualifiers
this.
maybe.
Qualifiers, exactly.
Yeah.
I use too many qualifiers.
Okay.
So no, probably would be incorrect to say unapologetic. I'm apologizing for being considered unapologetic. So there you go.
Provocative? Would you say you're provocative? Would you say you're purposeful,
Not. I don't think I'm
driven,
particularly. I might have, I don't. Purposeful, driven.
curious?
Yeah, curious for sure. One thing I don't know what the word for it would be, but I think a through line with a lot of things I've created is the idea of like comparison or juxtaposition. Even starting with that idea of like having something to bounce off of with film commentary in general, like to take that another step, I really like having two things to bounce off each other. And that's like a very common theme throughout many different things I've done. Like the Twin Peaks Cinema podcast, I guess, would be one of the more obvious examples of that, where it's like, it gives me, I like having, so, and even now lately on the video clips on Twitter, the ones I've been highlighting have been comparison ones. So like Asphalt Jungle and The Shining, or Dial M for Murder and Rear Window, like where they have something in common, it
Mm-hmm.
then lets you really trace out their differences, I think, in a fascinating way. So I like that type of dance between elements. I mean, that's one thing I love about Twin Peaks is you have Mark Frost and David Lynch, who I think are very different creators, and they get to play off of each other and kind of create things that independently they might not.
Yeah, totally. And I'm tempted to ask you about Dale Cooper, who I believe you have insinuated or maybe outright said that he's like the perfect amalgamation of the two creators. But instead, I'm going to give you a different comparison question. And how would you compare, contrast, or potentially equate the following: the Woodsman and Doug Puss? Are they equal?
That's interesting, because I feel like a common interpretation of the Doug Puz is basically the spirits. Like people have said, like Bob and the little man or Doug Puz. I always thought it made a better fit with Wyndham Earl, like somebody coming from the outside, meddling in the spirit world and maybe trying to control it in some way. I almost feel like, even though he comes from the lodge, like the doppelganger Mr. C is that kind of figure. So I would see him more. I see the Dugpa as the human actor in all of it. So the woodsmen are more like tools, you know. They're like physical particles made flesh, basically, or shown as flesh.
How about the dweller on the threshold as a concept or as a literal entity? What are your general thoughts on that as far as Twin Peaks goes?
I definitely find it much more interesting as a concept, you know, that you can turn into a figure, but it has to be a figure that represents the person confronting themselves. I mean, that's what's interesting about the dweller of the threshold, is this idea that you're facing your own shadow self. So I think when people externalize it too much, it becomes less interesting to me. It's just sort of a monster of the week type thing of, you know, will you battle the dweller on the threshold and whatever. It's like, no, it has to be the Jungian shadow. That's what's interesting about that idea, I think.
What does that mean? Or how would you describe it?
The dweller or the shadow, or just in general, that concept?
Both. Yeah, both.
Um, well, I'll describe it in the context, or with the examples of Twin Peaks, because I think that's easier than just sort of generalizing about it. I think in the arc of Twin Peaks, it's introduced as something that Cooper has to face and struggle with the implication that perhaps Leland in the past had struggled with something like that as well, partly in some deleted dialogue, which is part of the lore to me, even though they don't actually say it in episode 17. And then for whatever reason, he fails in that test. And I think the ground narratively, not in terms of the story chronology, but in terms of how we experience the story, it then shifts to Laura and shows us how she did actually succeed in confronting the dweller of the threshold. I think in part because she already, like, that wasn't the struggle. The struggle for her was not to recognize that, you know, her own face and her shadow. It was to recognize that there was more to her than the shadow, that this darkness wasn't all that there was to her. So in that sense, she might have even almost had an advantage over Cooper in that kind of narrow sense, because he's much more alienated from his darkness. Like, he's fascinated by the darkness and pulled towards it, but he seems to have trouble reconciling his sense of self with the knowledge of that potential for destruction and cruelty and selfishness and all of that. And that, I think, results in him being divided. Or I shouldn't say because that was sort of the John Thorne theory that I think was really compelling, and I almost wish they'd emphasized that more. But they do kind of flirt with the idea of the doppelganger being already there and all of that. I think a lot of stuff in Twin Peaks, it works better almost on the impressionistic level than on the explanatory level. So, like, if you see something, it almost makes more sense than what they end up telling you it is. That's kind of my my feeling about a lot of it.
So forgive me for being the dumb guy, but the word dweller and the word
Mhm.
threshold can be defined how, perhaps?
The idea is that if you want to get to the, at least as Hawk explains, if you want to get to the White Lodge, you have to pass through the dweller on the threshold. You have to confront your shadow self, understand that it's a part of you, and that it is, you and integrate it into your greater sense of self, and then you have access to the greater wisdom. And this is obviously something Frost wrote, drawing from Theosophy, but it makes the trajectory is a little bit different than Lynch's understanding of transcendental, or at least his explanations of transcendental meditation. But the kind of end goal is the same, of like a higher unity, like an integration of the different elements and understanding that you're part of this greater whole, rather than uh, resisting and keeping yourself apart and trying to stay quote unquote pure in a way that is actually diminished.
Yeah, so the word threshold like specifically refers to a space, a place, a boundary.
Well, it's a concept, but they literalize it in the form of the two lodges. So
Yeah.
literally within the mythology, the threshold is implicitly between the Black Lodge and the White Lodge.
Have
And
you
so in a psychological sense, it's between your lower sense of self, isolated, atomized, repressing certain things, and a higher sense of self that is wiser and more integrated. And the threshold is the spot between those two selves, and the dweller is yourself. The dweller is the part that you repress and resist and don't want to look at. And you have to, confront it with, what does Hawk say, perfect courage, or it'll utterly annihilate your soul. So that's
yeah.
in some ways the central struggle in Twin Peaks, that gets
Yeah.
refracted and diffused in all these different ways. Think of all the characters looking in mirrors from beginning to end.
Hmm. Do you have any experience with this any personal experience with this stuff, this concept, this activity perhaps?
I don't
This
really have like spiritual practices. I would say, I've read or otherwise engaged with ideas that resonated with like inner experiences or whatever. I guess that's how I describe it. But no, I don't have like a particular. I'm not like Lynch with the
yeah.
transcendental meditation and stuff, where he
So
has a
yeah.
specific, like, I think all of his spirituality is very much channeled through that particular experience and anchored in that, in a weird way. If it makes sense to say anchored with something that is ostensibly, you know, I don't know if unanchoring is the right word, but sending you off into this other realm or whatever.
I see. Yeah, well, your answer actually clarified something for me because it gave me a different angle to look at this. And is there like a shadow you, or have you ever done any of that stuff where you like
Um,
you try to consciously or deliberately make contact with whatever this stuff might be, or this part of oneself that might be, is that like a thing one can do intentionally, or does it kind of happen when it has to happen? Because
So, I mean, generally speaking, again, I'm giving you my impression of all this. I don't have a particular spiritual practice. I'm not by any means an expert in any of this, but
yeah, yeah, yeah.
my impression of this, the way this works is, yes, there are practices. I think it happens to people, let's just say spiritual experiences generally, they happen to people, and there are also things people can do to cultivate them. So if that answers the question, I guess. But
Yeah,
yeah, I think people have what they might call peak experiences that put them in touch with the parts of themselves that they are normally severed from, whether that be with drugs, with
hmm.
certain physical practices or whatever. I mean, honestly, I think most people at some point have something like that just with dreams, even where something will manifest to them in a altered consciousness state that they might not otherwise be aware of.
Yeah. I find the whole, like the whole possibility that like maybe somebody's a monster. It doesn't know it or something. Or maybe there's like there's monster within and you don't even know it.
Yeah.
But maybe other people see it and you don't see it. Or
Yeah, I think with that thing, I mean, that question always leads me back to Leland and the struggle that has always been one of the, I wouldn't necessarily say because I think Laura and in a maybe in more indirect way, Cooper are sort of more at the center. But Leland is almost like the litmus, the thing that you can hold up to look at and see a kind of crystalline picture of somebody like struggling with a darkness that they are not, a combination of not able and willing, and that it's kind of the crux of the issue. Where does one end and the other begin? To recognize and resist, if that's exactly the right word. But like, so I go back to like Leland, and I think what is compelling to me, what I've always sort of argued for and against people who sort of treat it as a more simplistic kind of possession narrative, I think both in terms of reality and in terms of within the story, it resonates more potently if we understand there's a sense of responsibility there, that for all the whatever may have unfairly been imposed upon him, he has a I mean, there are choices, but I wouldn't just limit it to the concept of choice or decision. It's also a sense that he's like, his core identity is enmeshed in what he denies. Like it's to separate out the the good Leland, the bad Bob, and all of that, I think is a diminishing exercise in many ways of the narrative, and in a weird way of Leland himself, because well, you might sort of preserve some flimsy sense of his morality or something, it's like now attached to a character who practically doesn't exist anymore. You can't, you're ripping out his guts if you try to if you try to if you indulge the denial that he himself, I think, exercises. That's my experience of it.
yeah, that is interesting. What do either of the following terms mean? So the first one is psychic, which could be a noun or an adjective.
Yeah.
And the second one is large entity. And I've watched Twin Peaks before, and I'm into the show
So
and
I've
whatnot.
heard.
Yeah, but nonetheless, I think these terms are interesting to try to, not to pin down, but just to explore. So take your pick, either or both. What do these terms mean?
In the context of Twin Peaks,
Yeah, I think so, but not necessarily.
I think psychic is it's a way of describing people that are plugged in or in a rhythm with the undercurrents of Twin Peaks. So not necessarily what's happening visually before their eyes, although it's often presented to us in a visual way because it's a visual medium. But they're tuned into the subterranean stream, so to speak, of Twin Peaks. I think that's what it means in the context of the show. I don't think it's necessarily like there's the literal sense of like Sarah's a psychic because she sees things she's not present for. But I think it's more of a deeper sense of like just in touch with that realm that can manifest in various ways. and large entity. I mean, I don't know if that's, I tend to use the word spirits to
Okay.
refer to that, but I guess less than the specific word one chooses, I'm sort of interested in what their kind of resonance is, or their importance to the narrative and the world that that it creates. So for me, uh, um, I find it most interesting when they correspond to something in the characters who are not from the spirit realm. I have fun kind of flirting sometimes with the thought of like, well, okay, these are beings, they have their own agenda or whatever, and all of that. That can be interesting. I think Jubal Brousseau once had a really interesting argument about how maybe like they speak in a kind of language like assembled from human touchstones that they don't fully understand, like, oh, the creamed corn, that's going to be our pictogram of pain and suffering or whatever, and all of that can be really interesting sometimes. But ultimately at the end of the day, what I'm looking at is how do they amplify and illustrate and reinforce the human drama? Like, what is it, what are they representing in that sense? And that's kind of where I go with it.
Yeah, that's trying to decide if I want to drill down. But I think I would like to ask a slightly different question. Are there any particular performances in Twin Peaks at large that you would like to shout out, especially call attention to, rhapsodize about? This could be cast, crew, big, small. Are there any performances that really just like drive you nuts in a good way?
I'm sure there'll be one I think of like after when I'm not, when I don't
Yeah,
need to
not put
answer
on
it.
the spot. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. Cause it's like, there are little moments, flourishes. Obviously there are the big performances that everybody knows about, talks about. There's a good, one character who I find interesting. A lot of people do not care for this character. I don't mean they don't like him because he's a villain, which he is, but like they kind of don't seem to find the performance style compelling. And I kind of do, is Hank Jennings. Chris Mulkey is that
Yeah.
character. I think his sort of like he's a phony, but he's not like you always know he's a phony, but you're also kind of like, oh, he's doing kind of a passable job pretending he's not. Like I know he is, but he has that like con artist charm about him. And I find that interesting. I actually find that to be, and it's very different from a lot of, it's a little more nuanced, kind of less heightened than a lot of Twin Peaks performances. So it's different in that way. I've always thought that was an interesting performance and character in that sense.
Anything cast, crew, behind the scenes that jump to mind? And you could say no.
Let's see. Well, of course, Mary Sweeney. I mean, that's the one that I've devoted by far the most attention to outside of Lynch and Frost. And I guess that's less of a Twin Peaks thing, although that Twin Peaks is her breakthrough, both the killer's reveal and the Fire Walk with Me, which is so fascinating that those are the only two parts of Twin Peaks that she has a hand in editing. Well, a direct hand, because I think she was assistant editor on some of the other stuff. But like for that to be her initiation into the Lynchverse is very interesting, I think.
Yeah, say a little bit more about her, if you don't mind.
She has a particular, there's a couple things that are fascinating about her. One is like harder to pin down. It's just a general sensibility that her presence corresponds to in Lynch's work that takes us from Maddie's murder to Mulholland Drive. She's like heavily involved in almost all of that, other than like the Twin Peaks finale and I think one of the segments in Hotel Room. Everything else she's editing for him. And so there's this kind of sensibility of the Sweeney years, as I call them, that like 10-year period. that to me is the most romantic, intoxicating, dreamy Lynch that there is. I like the other stuff, but I don't have the same, like, the passion of it to me is rooted in those, like, Fire Walk with Me, Mulholland Drive, Lost Highway, Straight Story, really, in a way, The Killer's Reveal, and Twin Peaks. Like, that stuff, I think, when without her, Lynch is a little more, and this is interesting too, like, I'm not saying this is a criticism, but he's a little more dry at times. He's a little more like, and you can get reductive about this stuff, but there is sort of like a yin yang, masculine, feminine energy thing about it, where when he's working closely with her, I mean, it's explicit in the sense that there are many more feminine protagonists in his work during those years, but also just in a more general kind of sense of what you would associate, again, in that sort of Jungian sense of like the anima and the animus. I really find that rhythm really rich and fascinating. I think her collaboration with Lynch interests me for like the opposite reason of Lynch and Frost collaboration, where I feel like they really, yes, they jive on certain things, but I feel like they're really divergent figures, and I like that element of reacting off of one another and almost to one another in a way. With Sweeney, it's much more harmonious, and so there's that general sense. Specifically, her editing rhythms, I really, really, really like. The sequences in like Lost Highway, in the desert, her superimpositions over things. And I think it's fair to call. I mean, this is something that it's still a little bit hard to separate Lynch and Sweeney. It's worth pointing out that he kind of starts in this direction with Wild at Heart. She was an assistant editor on that, but that was a Dwayne Dunham joint, and he kind of continues it into Inland Empire, which she was not directly editing. So it's not just a Mary Sweeney thing, but it certainly is in rhythm with her presence, and I think attributable in many ways to her because, for one thing, he was not a hands-on editor until the digital period. Prior to that, he didn't even like editing. It was like a sad process for him because he's taking things away, necessary but sad. And he would sort of let the editors handle it, and then he'd come in and comment, and they'd start to tweak it together, and he'd be involved at that point, but they would be hands-on. And you never quite know what goes on in those editing rooms and how that alchemical process works, but there's some magic happening there between them that to me results in his richest strain of work.
Yeah, that's cool. I appreciate you going a little more into depth, and I know you've spoken about Mary Sweeney quite a bit in the past, but I just kind of wanted to hear you synthesize it.
Yeah, and I'll point to any viewers who haven't seen it to I have several Journey Through Twin Peaks chapters on their collaboration, but I also distilled them into a standalone video that I put up on Vimeo called Dream Souls, David Lynch and Mary Sweeney, that you can kind of watch independently of Journey Through Twin Peaks, even though they were conceived as chapters within that series. It provides kind of a half-hour overview of their coming together, they're coming apart. Not entirely chronological; it jumps around a little bit, but like it has that sort of flow of the collaboration and where it ended up.
Yeah, that's good stuff. I did watch that one. The the Laura Orb, as it's famously known in part 8 of The Return.
Yeah.
What is that? And like, why do you think it's filmed and like handled in the manner it is?
My
Your
way
opinion,
of
obviously your opinion.
My way of responding to it was different from a lot of other people's. I can see why people got sort of upset with it. Like, why are we turning this very human character into a sort of cartoon deity or something, a deity? But to me, even though it takes place ostensibly in 1945 and it's like a prequel thing, it feels to me like a post Fire Walk with Me gesture. and I kind of read it more as an artistic gesture than like a narrative component, even though it is that it has its own purpose to serve. I see it as a celebration of the Laura that has transcended via Firewalk with Me, both literally and in the text of like ending up in the red room with the angel crying and laughing, but also like metatextually, where they took this character that was in the background that was like a MacGuffin for the other characters and slowly gave her more and more life until she becomes this unforgettable cinematic presence. So that moment of like kind of birthing Laura and kissing her, sending her down to earth almost feels like a tribute to what they've already done in the narrative to me. And that's how I read it, more in that light than as a literal, statement that actually the Laura was always this goddess figure that was just, coming down Christ-like to suffer or whatever.
Mm.
It is interesting too that it's the school portrait, which Laura herself has always been the false. It's kind of been the false image of Laura. That's how it was presented. I will say false with a grain of truth. I think the idea is you look at it and you can catch, in the original Twin Peaks, you can catch a glimpse of what might have been there, but it's so distant and you're held at the distance by this facade, this smiling facade that you can't get past. And so it's interesting to see that that's the picture he chose to put inside the orb and send down as a representation of Laura, which makes it feel more iconic in a way and less about Laura as the flesh and blood human being, but kind of referring to that, for me at least.
Yeah, is that how you initially interacted with that
Yeah,
scene?
that was my gut reaction
Interesting.
and kind of
Oh.
how I've always felt about it ever since.
Yeah, that's just really cool to say, here's something that's in the story, but maybe is not having a story based or narrative role, but it's actually functioning in some other sort of way.
Yeah, I mean, I think
Yeah,
if
that's
it was
neat.
put there, maybe even by Mark Frost in like a literal way, but just the way David Lynch handles it, to me, communicates more as a gesture.
Yeah, that's what I was
Action
curious about. Like,
and something like that.
yeah, I was curious to hear your thoughts specifically about that. Like not only what it is, but like the way it's filmed, how it's handled, like all the decisions that were made.
Well,
Like I guess artistically.
one of the most interesting things about The Return is that it's in many ways the first time we really get to see like David Lynch fully handling and embodying and making his own what are probably Frostian concepts, because they just weren't that head to head on the original series. They wrote the pilot together, and there's so much that hasn't yet come up in the pilot, and everything after that is kind of a little more of a tug of war, I think, between them, and less of like, here's this thing we work on together. David Lynch obviously decides he can live with it because he goes ahead and shoots it, but he sort of places it within his own frame of reference, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. Take your pick with my next question. One of them is about dual archetypes, and I've heard you speak of this elsewhere, and I'm not 100% sure of what that means. So my question is, which characters within Twin Peaks are dual archetypes? Another question concerns the Laura's dream in Firewalk with Me, where she finds out from Annie that the Good Dale is supposedly in the lodge. Like, does that resonate at all to the way Philip Gerard or Mike appears in The Return? Like, is there any similarities there? Yeah, and
With it,
my first question was about dual archetypes. What does that mean? And
I'll answer that one secondly, but
yeah,
if
and I'm
you don't
gonna
mind, I'll answer the specific one first. So I think in terms of Annie's appearance, I mean, it's different because I guess it's similar because they're projecting from one place into another, and she's supposedly, as the missing pieces show, in the hospital projecting into Laura's room. The fact that she's a human character, although I guess it's worth asking, he's credited as Philip Gerard. So is that the human Philip Gerard throughout the return? For my character series, I just decided he was Mike. I just said, when he's doing his spirit duties and he's always in the spirit place, we don't see him at all in the physical world, except when he's projecting from the spirit place. You could make some interesting argument about how actually this is the shoe salesman incorporated into the. It's just Occam's razor, if you can ever apply such a thing to Twin Peaks, says that this is the spirit Mike. He's encoded that way. So to me, that's different from Annie being alive in the human world, being, sort of warped through this it's almost more similar to Cooper and Laura seeing each other in their dreams, I would say, than it is to the actual spirits manifesting. Does that answer your question? Or does that go in a different direction? Okay.
No, it does. And is Annie actually contacting Laura, or is Laura just having a dream?
I mean, she's definitely contacting her, because we see her saying the same thing in the missing pieces in that hospital scene at the end. So, if we take that as canon, quote unquote, then, which is the context we're talking about this in, so I guess we kind of have to, for the sake of this argument at least, then I think the idea is she's being used to speak to Laura in a dream. So yes, it's a dream, but it's also, real as these things go in Twin Peaks. It's never just one thing or the other. There's like, it's the relationship between them is fluid. So,
fluid is a good word. And then can you just tell me what dual archetypes are? I have a sense, but I don't think I'm gonna.
What was the you said I used this phrase?
Yeah, and if you don't remember, it's
I mean,
okay.
I've definitely used those words independently, and I probably put them together at some point, but
honestly,
you don't remember the context?
Almost, I would say 90% of my questions, I'm driving in the car, I'm thinking of stuff, and I'm just talking into my phone. And I need to, by the way, I need to get my phone to respond to the word Diane. So
that's perfect. Yeah.
I realized literally yesterday that most of my tweets or comments or whatever, or even just notes to self, are just me driving and talking into a device. So
well, people have definitely observed that, like, Diane is the proto Siri, which makes her presence in the return, where she's like this weird
that's interesting
helper presence that has some autonomy, has some not autonomy. I mean, she
that's
to me
cool,
is
actually.
Diane is to me the most fascinating character in the return. I think if I was to say one thing above all else that the return adds to Twin Peaks, it would be Diane. I think many of its other very interesting contributions are sort of more riffs on stuff that was already kind of there. And then, and then there's stuff like Judy or whatever that you can kind of grapple with that is sort of new, but sort of vague or whatever. Like, to me, Diane has the most to explore. But to answer your question, I guess I would focus on the duality part of that, because that's an idea that interests me. That I don't know if, strictly speaking, you're the language guy, so you might know better than me. Like, I tend to think that duality and dualism, I don't know if they're really used differently, but they have different connotations to me. I think of dualism as like more of a dogmatic insistence on dichotomy, and duality as a recognition of different sides that are still connected. So like a duality would be ultimately expressing or implying a oneness, whereas a dualism would be more of a pushing apart. And so I think of Twin Peaks, especially at its best, as being more about duality than dualism. And yes, we're showing all these fragmented pairs and doubles, but the idea ultimately is to bring them together rather than to like drive them further apart and say, here's one extreme, here's the other. Yes, you are looking at one extreme and then the other, but ideally it's with a sense of understanding their relationship to one another.
And does this make you think of Diane also?
Yes, although what's interesting about her and what I think is somewhat new in Twin Peaks is there are all these scattered pieces that kind of feel in a way like they don't totally refer back to a whole. But they're all integral. So that's interesting. I've never really thought about this before. In some ways, Diane is like it's not dualism exactly, because like we're not shown like here's Diane's good side, here's her bad side, here's this. It's more just like I don't think there's a, you know, even though the Tulpa collaborates with Cooper and stuff, but there doesn't seem to be like a heavy implication of like hierarchy of the selves with Diane. It's just more different selves. It's more components that can, you know, the Humpty Dumpty that can't be put back together again. But each of those elements, particularly the one that we're told like explicitly is the most illusionistic of all of them, which is the Tulpa one, they have like a vitality to them. Like it's like as if Humpty Dumpty was shattered, each of the pieces contained, you know, contained some sort of, you know, came to life on its own. Like think of the broom in Fantasia, the Sorcerer's Apprentice, where it splits apart and it becomes all these different brooms. It's like that's kind of how I see a Diane in a way. Like she's been split apart, and each of those fragments has its own presence, and it might be calling out for the whole, but it can't find its way to it. So in that sense, she's like almost a parallel but different to Cooper and his experience, where there is a sense that there's a whole that is that these different parts have been pulled apart from and are trying to find, but he has the option of finding it and she doesn't. Somehow she can't. She has to make do with being these various split up parts. And you know, on another level too, like I've talked about with John Thorne, she's not, that's not just true within the isolated character concept of Diane, but also of Diane as in a way a part of Cooper. You know, this idea that she is decorated like the Red Room, that she also looks like his tape recorder, which she was referred to as, or which was referred to as her throughout the original series, and that this is something he's lost in his sort of Lodge Odyssey, and so he can't get back in touch with that. And I always love with Twin Peaks that this idea that it's not totally either or, that like these things both kind of work and exist in a kind of, you know, think of like a mogul, like a spinning, you know, what's the thing that hangs over a mobile, the thing that hangs over a baby's head? Yeah. Where it's like got these different arms and there's things hanging off of the arms and they're independent of each other, but they're also connected. And that's kind of how I see these paradoxes in Twin Peaks. I think Andreas Halskov has written about this too, this idea of like contradictions that are somehow weirdly complementary, you know. And I think that Diane maybe is the most paradoxical character in the Return, and the richest for that.
So please forgive me for the following question, but I'm gonna put you on the clock. We're gonna go old school. We're gonna go speed round, because I know you like the speed round. So
yeah, they're fun.
For the first one, we're
the
gonna
microphone around, so hopefully I'm not creating volume headaches for you. It's, I don't know why I never got a stand. I've always just held it in my hand. It's foolishness, but I'm a creature of habit.
You're who you are.
I can't.
By the way, do you like yourself?
I'm not gonna answer that one. Yes, I mean I like myself, but I guess I just answered it, but not in a serious sense.
You mean you don't like yourself in a serious sense, or you didn't answer?
No, I'm not going to answer it in a serious sense.
Oh, okay.
But yes, I mean, my instinct is to say yes. How's that?
I like it. That was a warm-up round.
Okay.
So you kind of invented this game the last time we spoke, and it's not a very complex game, but you get 60 seconds or less. But for the first round, you get 30 seconds or less. And the question is, who is Diane?
Diane is a tulpa, NATO, a tape recorder, Cooper's anima, an independent creature, and Linda. And more.
Okay, so the rule is, I guess you can go less than the time limit.
Sure, why not?
right.
You don't have to hit it right on the button.
And you have a minute for the next question. Some thoughts on the character or the role or the various functions of Lucy.
Sort of the wise comic relief type, like Andy, I think, where they're foolish, the wise fool, maybe you could say, where they're affectionately, and amusingly regarded as kind of silly, sometimes maybe not all that bright, and yet not only is their heart in the right place, they're useful in the moment they need to be useful in a way that maybe other characters are not or can't be.
Great. The famous line, I feel like I know her, but sometimes my arms bend back. What does that first clause mean? The I feel like I know her part.
That's interesting because it's almost a more Diane-like statement, isn't it? Like that seems like something Diane or one of the Dianes would say. Whereas Laura, I think certainly by the time, if we're looking at her presence in the Red Room is coming post Firewalk with me, it seems like she actually does have a more integrated sense of self at that point. I would almost say maybe it's a relic of an earlier conception, but they stuck with it. So I don't know.
The in the Return, part 17, Cooper asks Diane, "Do you remember everything?" Now, first of all, do you remember that part?
Yes.
What does that mean, everything?
I think the explanation that people tend to lean on is that he's talking about a plan to find Judy or whatnot that she's like a part of. And I think that seems to be where Frost's interested in it. So maybe he came up with the line, maybe that was how it was written, but I think it probably has deeper implications than that I probably can't answer in a minute. So that's that for a dodge.
That's okay. That's okay. Most people wouldn't even play this game. So
I like the it's almost like not power suggestion, but like it's like for almost free associational.
yeah, the
I like
constraints help. I think the
that. Yeah,
constraints, yeah,
makes it interesting.
yeah, I agree with that. Um, when did Ray meet Daria? Any speculations, thoughts? How, where, through whom, etc. No, it's a random question.
Yeah, it's funny because we know he's an FBI informant, but they never really say what she was because she's obviously part of the plot with him. So where like did he just kind of use her, or was she also in touch with Jeffries and stuff? And did they meet through their involvement with Mr. C? I guess rather than answer, I can only ask more questions.
Hmm.
But
Yeah, a lot of these
maybe those will
questions
bring
kind of.
some people to an answer, or at least have fun thinking of possibilities.
Yeah, and I wonder if that's even an important question, but possibly. Maybe there's some maybe there's some big jewel underneath that little random stone. Probably not. But there's a famous line in Twin Peaks that goes, "We live inside a dream." Have you ever heard that line?
Before Twin Peaks?
No, in Twin Peaks. Do you remember that line?
Oh yeah, of course. That's like the climax really of the part 17 in a way.
Yeah.
I mean, I
So
guess it has
but
several climaxes.
my question for you is, in 30 seconds or less, who's we?
The viewers and Cooper, and I'm not sure about others.
Okay. An old question from an online buddy of mine named Chris, who asks, can Bob switch hosts on the go? Can Bob possess multiple people at once? After Leland died, where did he go? So you could take any or all of those.
There's no evidence of the second one. And the first one, it seems difficult because there's a process to how he gets in Leland and how he gets with Mr. C. What was the third one again? If we still have 10 seconds on the clock.
I forget. Oh, where did
Okay.
he go after Leland?
Okay. Easy answer is back to the lodge, but I think it's interesting to think he could become entangled or superposed, to use the quantum terms that Martha Nachemson uses with Lynch, even though we're not given any evidence of it. There would be something Lynchian about it if he could be in multiple places at once.
Did Bob travel, like, that experiment scene in part 8 where you see all that splurge coming up? Was Bob just hitching a ride, like hitchhiking, or was Bob sort of birthed there or something else?
I kind of doubt that's the beginning of Bob.
Yeah,
but
same.
at least maybe it's the beginning of him in that particular quote unquote form, because matter is always splitting and reforming and combining and coming apart. And again, that idea of superposition and entanglement, that you can, that complexity of matter. So yeah, I don't know.
I actually, and I just realized last night that you and she did a long interview together, and so that's kind of like right on my list for next things to
yeah, I did a couple. I
check
did text. I mean, they were both over the phone or whatever, audio, but one was turned into a print interview and from 2014, and that's more focused on her books, The Passion of David Lynch and David Lynch Swerves. And then we did a podcast interview in 2019 about her book called I'm blanking on it at the moment, but it's actually about TV, like the premium cable era kind of these TV shows like Mad Men and Sopranos, and there's a chapter on the return in that.
It has auteur in the title, I think.
Yeah, is it auteur TV or
yeah, that's cool. I've been really interested in what she has to say, and I know basically none of it, so I'm looking forward to checking that out because I can't get any more books right now. I have too much reading to catch up on.
I know, me too.
Plus, I'm trying to read, other fiction as well. But not trying, I'm reading other fiction as well.
Yeah.
But I should say I'm trying to make time, trying to just manage my time for it. We'll stick with part 8. The fireman seems to have an interesting work day. At least from what we get to see. Maybe not his typical day, or maybe it's just a typical Tuesday.
I know, right? Who knows?
Where he's just got fires to start or put out, all over the place. Do you think this is an unusual day, or do you think, yeah, really? He works at his own pace. And he talks, well, if it's him, I should say the giant speaks very slowly when we first encounter him as well. So that's kind of interesting. A lot of slow stuff between the fireman, the giant, the waiter, and they all have some connection to each other, although I can't quite say what it is. So I guess I'll change my question to, what's up with the slowness between those characters, or any of the characters individually? What do you think about that?
I mean, I want to answer it in a meta way, which is that's David Lynch intervening in the narrative in season 2 after a very fast-paced finale, which was all Frost, like all written, directed, some of the purest Frost we get in Twin Peaks. And Lynch supposedly watched that episode and said his only comment was, "Oh, a lot happened that night, huh?" or something like that. So the waiter and the giant are quite literally like Lynch stepping in and just being like, "Slow down."
We're gonna maybe recapture something or redirect something here.
Yeah. And
So
it's funny because the audience, if there's any one point that the audience, that Twin Peaks lost its mass audience for good, I mean, you can make a few cases, but that's kind of the clearest moment where the tide shifted and where it lost the critical buy-in too, was the giant in episode 8, not part 8.
yeah, and that's a piece that's one of the videos you did in your journey to Twin Peaks series. That was really one of the more excellent videos in my opinion.
Well, it got to be kind of meta because within the context of the video essay, I don't show the whole 16-minute sequence, but I show like a minute or two or maybe 3, which for the in a micro, it's like a microcosm of the show, because for the video essay, that 3 minutes is much slower than the pace I'd been keeping. So it's like on a
exactly,
kind of
yeah.
a economy of scales. I don't know if that's the right word. I kind of tried to represent the experience of watching the show within the context of watching the video essay.
Yeah, because it takes quite a bit of real estate in your video.
Which was one of the things that when I had a little bit of a run-in with CBS in 2014 that they objected to, was some of these clips run on for a bit long, and I said, well, I had to make the case that there was a reason for that. I wasn't just like, hey, look at Twin Peaks, you're getting access to it here on this free YouTube channel. It was like, no, I was, as part of the analysis I was doing, it had to play for some extra time. But that was interesting. Little side note on that, the I was contacted by a lawyer from them at that time, and I got in touch with Kevin B. Lee because he'd had run-ins with YouTube very early on. He was kind of the test case for a lot of the copyright stuff. And he was like, oh, wow, that's crazy. I've never actually talked to a lawyer directly for any. I've just gotten the takedown notices. And it went fairly well. I mean, there's a lot more I could say about that because they claim the underlying content in order to monetize it. So CBS has made money from my videos, but I never have. But and there's a sort of a where's fair use, where's their thing, where does that, and all of this. There's actually, there's a decent to the extent that anything in the US isn't just up to the whims of somebody in a robe somewhere. There is decent legal precedence and acceptance of fair use to a degree that I think people don't quite realize, that you can use a lot more stuff a lot more freely than you might think, which is interesting. But anyways, let's move on from that.
No,
Are we still on the lightning round, or?
Yeah, let's go back to the lightning round.
Back to the lightning round.
We get a digression here and there. Blue Rose Task Force podcast, John Bernardi, and often it's just him solo, but sometimes he does a co-host, and she's great. Anyway, that podcast has offered a pretty compelling case, in my opinion, that the show is heading towards cancellation, mainly because of ratings, not because they didn't reveal the killer. And many people have criticized like the fact that they had to go ahead and reveal the killer, and but
oh yeah, okay, so you're saying chronologically it was headed for cancellation before they were forced to
it wasn't it wasn't like the killer reveal that really killed the show. It was the ratings were dipping anyway. So and I know you've criticized.
Can we do this one as not a lightning round?
Sure.
Before we go back to the lightning round, because I want to dig into this somewhat.
Yeah, but I'm bumbling a little bit, so I'm actually going to read. Do you or any other critics of that decision to reveal the killer? Do you have an alternate path or storyline that could have maintained the integrity of the show, but also kept the ratings?
I wouldn't call myself a critic of the revealing the killer. I mean, I think it's complex because they didn't have much of anywhere to go after that, but it creates the best moments of Twin Peaks, both directly and indirectly. I mean, the
Mhm.
killer's reveal is extraordinarily powerful, and Fire Walk with Me is possible because of it, and probably because it happened when it did. If somehow they'd been more successful and they'd gone on for several seasons, I don't know that they would have made a prequel film. So, you know, in that sense, it had to happen. And I also like the fact that the Twin Peaks that Lynch seems to have wanted is it's, you know, as he says, a beautiful thing, right? This idea of like longing and not knowing and gazing into the mystery forever. Like, I get the appeal of that. I really do. But the forcing of his hand by whoever, I kind of thought it was Frost had more of a role in it, and numerous people have said, no, 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 like really, whatever. For because Frost made some comments to the press that were a little more diplomatic in terms of, well, you know, we had to reveal it, but from it seems like it really was the executives pushing it more than anybody else. The fact that he had to do that and confront that totally and this is kind of one of the theses of Journey Through Twin Peaks. I think it totally transformed his work, and I think took it to a deeper, more profound place where instead of just being this, I don't want to be dismissive of it, because again, there's something really rich and intoxicating about living in the mystery forever, and some work should do that. But I'm glad Twin Peaks didn't, because what it gave us instead was an understanding that actually the answers matter and deepen what we have in front of us instead of reducing it. So it certainly wasn't a failure in that sense, in the sense that it killed the core purpose of the story, and they didn't have that there was no way to follow. Like, the only way to follow it up is to do something like Fire Walk with Me or The Return, where you keep circling around that even from a distance, and it's always kind of there on the periphery or at the core, at the distant core. But they tried to move on from Laura altogether. And ultimately, what's interesting about the back half of the series is their failure to do so, their inadvertent failure to do so, not what they were trying to do, in my opinion. So, anyways, that's kind of my my sentiment on the revealing of the killer. So I guess in that sense, I can't quite answer the question, because I would not, I wouldn't say it was I wouldn't criticize the, it was made, the people making it were making that decision were making it for the wrong reasons, but it kind of had to happen that way, you know. And I don't think there was an alternate path, really. I mean, this is the interesting thing about David Lynch and Twin Peaks. He loved the concept of creating a TV world and just living in it, and it never ending and this and that. But like, it was always like in theory, it was always like in the abstract. He left it to other people to handle, and so they were like, okay, I guess we have to make a TV show. And then they made a TV show, and he seemed kind of upset about that, but I don't think he ever really had an alternative to that. I mean, kind of what we got in The Return, but that, you know, that wasn't possible in 1990 and on ABC to make like an 18-hour film, quote unquote, and just kind of luxuriate forever. And even The Return works the way it works because it's conceived as like a limited series. If you were doing that for seasons on end, I don't, you know, he could do something interesting with that, but I don't think he ever really gave it a go. All we have of Twin Peaks is like him saying, God, it would be great to live in this world. Now I'm going to go off and make a movie. You guys take care of this. And then showing up being like, oh, no, not like this. And then making fascinating interventions and then leaving again and so forth. So, yeah, it's kind of a dream that he could never attain.
Yeah, that's interesting. And you've certainly heard more, at least fan commentary and theories than I have. and I was just curious if anybody ever came up with a way to keep the show alive and to still keep that particular like mystery alive, because all indications are that the show is not going to stay alive due to ratings.
Yeah, well, that's another thing, and that was kind of initially why I said let's take a break from the speed round, because that whole thing about why Twin Peaks went off the air, I do feel, yeah, it's undoubtedly, I don't want to call it the rot, maybe appropriate for a show about trees, but you know, in terms of its business viability, its financial, or you know, whatever, its value to the network, the rot set in almost immediately. The pilot was massive, and that's the only part of Twin Peaks that was massive. Nothing ever was again that way. Maybe the Secret Diary book, because that was on the New York Times bestseller list. So it doesn't take much to get, you know, books don't have to sell that many copies to get on there. Maybe they did in 1990. I don't know, but that was like another part of Twin Peaks that was way up there, and it certainly got the cultural elite, let's say, on its side for a while. And then they turned on it rather harshly, but like it was on the cover of all these magazines. It was part of this pop culture hype. It was on SNL, not because it was so hugely popular with audiences, but because the people who were watching it were like movers and shakers in that world. They were kind of talking to themselves a little bit, you know, like it's interesting the extent to which that's the case. Like in terms of normies, they really did appear to tune into the pilot in major numbers. Like that's something it still kind of blows my mind. I mean, Lynch's most successful film didn't reach as many people as that one episode of television in 1990. And I guess honestly, his most successful film would, not successful in terms of profitability, but in terms of number of people reached, would probably be Dune, which was a flop. But you know, it made 40 million, so however many tickets that is, you know, it reached more people than whatever would come second. So, but you hold that up against Twin Peaks, and Twin Peaks reached more, you know, 33 million viewers or something like that. Unthinkable in today's TV environment. But then where do you go from there? It's like you can catch them for that moment, and then you're just going to lose them from there on, being David Lynch. And he did every time. I mean, it stuck around for a few episodes, numbers slipping. The dream sequence kind of told some people this isn't for me. And then the season 1 finale pissed a bunch of people off. And then the season 2 premiere was the big turning point. But like by that point, the game that Twin Peaks had to play was to keep kind of tickling the chins of the yuppies and the you know, cultural commentators, because they were kind of all it had going for it at that point, and it didn't. It pissed them off, and that was the final straw. From that point on, the show was done, because those were the only people really keeping it alive, both in terms of advertising demographics and also in terms of like buzz, you know, like getting it to a point where like normies would see it on a magazine stand and be like, oh, I guess this show's big, even though I don't watch it, you know, like it was that. And Lynch had to play a game, which was to be sort of coy and postmodern and winking and not take anything too seriously for them to keep embracing it. And that wasn't the direction he was interested in going in. And so by the time you reach Firewalk with Me, I mean, good Lord, I've never, it still blows, and it's such an essential part of the lore, like the horrible reaction that movie got. And really, in a way, more from critics than audiences. Audiences just didn't care. They just didn't go. But the critics who had to see it for their jobs, like they were the ones who really like, just like they were the ones keeping Twin Peaks alive early on, they were the ones jabbing that dagger in as deep as they could go.
That's interesting. Maybe that was maybe that was sort of like a inverse reaction
totally
from something that you know, if you're, that's a weird role to be in, you know, because you're pushing and promoting something and you're singing the praises of something, and then you know there's a little turn and maybe you overdo it in the other direction. Another thing that you might know that I don't because I haven't seen anything yet. Do you know if anybody has done any like compelling interpretation of the use of transparencies, or maybe we call that superimpositions, or I don't know what the technical term is, within the return? Like there's been many transparent faces that show up.
Mm.
We have Cooper, we have Laura's orb, we have Laura in Gordon Cole's doorway, and we have a couple others, I think, as well. So has anybody sort of like threaded together any connections between all that, or maybe you, or maybe you have current thoughts?
That's fascinating that you bring that up, because my instinct is to say that there's less superimposition in the return than, say, like the Sweeney years stuff. But you're right, like there's those major moments, and I think maybe a difference between those and the earlier films is like in the earlier films, a lot of the superimposition stuff. I mean, there's moments like in the original series, obviously, like Laura's face is superimposed on Donna, the owl superimposed on Bob and stuff. But I think a lot of times with superimpositions in Lynch's work, it's like dissolves between scenes, like long, lingering kind of overlap. Whereas in this, it's like more static stuff with something just kind of placed over it, like a screen. Oh, sorry, I forgot this was a speed round.
That's okay. You still have
I
some
don't know
time.
I don't know if I have more to say about it than that.
Mm.
Just that interesting kind of contrast with his earlier work. But yeah, I don't know that I have more to say about it at this moment. I haven't seen people, but I do know John Thorne certainly has a lot of commentary on that face in the sheriff's station for sure.
Yeah, yeah. Any thoughts on the Laura appearance in Gordon Cole's doorway?
I love that moment at the time because it's like, because of the callback to Laura and Firewalk with Me that we weren't getting quite as much of in the return. Like it was always sort of implicit, but that was a moment where it really jumped out at you. I mean, my instinct is just like, that's kind of what it is. It's like in the midst of this, all these other stories, it's like, bam, don't forget this is about Laura in the face of Lynch himself, There's probably more that it could be said or dug into about why it happens in that moment at that time. An interesting thing, again, with talking about Diane and her character, this is a moment where Albert comes and tells him information about Diane not being who she seems. So I don't know. Maybe there's something there.
Yeah, it's interesting. The World Spins, a very famous scene at the Roadhouse where that song is being performed. And what's happening to the characters in that scene? Or maybe my preferred question is what's happening to the viewers, the fans of the show? Because there's a physical reaction that's happening, and it's not just happening to me. It's happening to people watching that scene, whether they're outside the Roadhouse or maybe the characters within it. Like it's a fake show. It's fiction, but stuff is happening there for sure. You have any thoughts on that?
I think that is an example of Lynch's brilliance in situating something. He's brilliant in the details, but he's also brilliant in the context, in a way that might be sort of underrated sometimes. I think, people say, oh, he's got these great flourishes, but he needs somebody else to sort of organize and do it. And granted, as I said, this was one of the first things Mary Sweeney ever edited. So she was there to kind of feed off that energy and give it some form and shape. But nonetheless, like, this is Lynch's conceit, I think, his concept of using the Roadhouse as these kind of brackets around the murder sequence. And I think it's part of this notion that it's not just the core thing you're showing people that matters. It's the context that you place around it that leads you to that. There's a famous quote from, God, it might have been Quentin Tarantino's editor. Actually, no, I think it was Dee Allen. I think the editor of Bonnie and Clyde. She said, if you want to speed up a scene or change the tone of it, don't mess with the scene, mess with what comes right before it. And that will completely change how you perceive it. So that's kind of how I see this weaving together of the Roadhouse and the Palmer living room.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's just so undeniably powerful, you know. I believe probably for the actors as well, not even just the characters that they're playing.
Yeah, and
But
Dana
it's
Ashbrook
just
wasn't even supposed to be there. He just
yeah,
showed up
yeah,
on set.
yeah. It's just fascinating that we're watching fiction and we're having such a real like physical reaction to it.
Well, what
Um,
does Audrey say in The Return? Dreams sometimes hearken to a reality, right?
yeah, and some people say that certain works of fiction are they're more real than I don't
Yeah.
know looking through your silverware drawer for a spoon or you know
They
because
they crystallize it.
yeah because they contain something that's sort of maybe more eternal or maybe more shared or universal or something something that's deep rather than just something mundane. But I think they're both real. I don't know. I like that scene. I I heard something about Star Trek today that I'm not really a big Star Trek watcher, although I enjoyed it. Supposedly there's like a test that is, and the whole thing behind the test is that it's unsolvable, where like there's a riddle or something and it's unsolvable, and the point is like it's supposed to uh it's supposed to communicate to people that there are certain things in life that you're going to encounter that are just not solvable, and you have to come to grips with that. And yeah, that Roadhouse scene makes me feel that way. Like there's evil or something, that we're all gonna witness or encounter, and you're not gonna be able to win. You're not gonna be able to defeat certain things. And I almost feel like that scene is like everybody's getting washed over with that feeling, like, oh, some things you just can't beat. But I'm not sure. But I'm not sure why that creates such a physical reaction in me. I can only speak for myself, but it's an amazing scene. Is Jacoby a good guy? Yes or no?
uh is Jacoby a good guy? I mean, this sort of gets to the problem with like Twin Peaks canon, because I feel like there's things that were told, and then there's things that like, well, is this part really, part of the full story or something? It's like I think the show wants us to think of him as a good guy in the end, but it also kind of implies that he at very least was like hitting on his like disturbed teenage patient, which is kind of unforgivable. So yeah, I mean, I think that a lot of the characters in Twin Peaks, you can't really, they're not set up in a way that you're supposed to be able to say good or bad. I mean, even somebody like Leland, they give you these weird sort of outs where it's like, if you want to make an excuse for him, you can, like I think Lynch is ultimately, and probably more so than Frost in a way. Maybe I'm wrong about this, but I get the impression he's less interested in good or bad people than he is in like good and bad, which I do think he distinguishes. He's not like a sort of a relativist about it, but good and bad within the context of a person. Like again, going back to that idea I talked about before, where it's like you have to integrate the shadow self. I don't think he's super interested in judgment, I would say. And I don't want to say that in a sense that it's like amoral or something, because I don't think he's that. But I generally don't think he's totally after judgment of people, of his characters. It's more observation in a way. And uh, like
Five, four,
oh yeah,
three.
we're done with that. That was way past
So
30.
the answer is Jacoby a good guy? Yes or no?
Uh
I'll give you an
pass.
easier question. All
Pass.
right, all
How's
right.
that?
Is it Here's an easier question. Is it
I mean,
easy to be
probably not, honestly, but it feels kind of false
okay?
to say no, and I'm not even sure why. So I'll
Oh, okay. All
pass.
right. Let's see. Is it easy to be a good man? I'm thinking of Ben Horn, but also I'm thinking of you and me and just any?
Yeah, in life. I mean, that interesting question, actually.
Hmm.
It's easy. I think it is. I actually think it's easy to be a good man. It's very easy, maybe even easier not to be.
Solid. If Bob wants in at all costs for whatever reason, yeah, like Bob, he just wants a piece of you, um, like big time for whatever reason.
Yeah, like with
Can
Laura or
somebody?
Leland or Cooper.
Yeah, is there a way to live that can deny Bob? You know, if you're his target and he wants it, like, is that doable?
Well, it's interesting you said a way to live, because I would say Laura in Fire Walk with Me, but obviously she dies in the end.
No, what I'm saying is there a way to live to keep him from getting in, whatever that might mean?
Well, yeah, no, I do think
Yeah.
that the crux. I mean, I think the crux of that movie is that Laura ultimately wins out over him, but within the context of her dying, which is like
Mm,
the precondition of the show existing in the first place. So they're kind of
mm,
stuck in that. Um, so I mean, yeah, I think there's a scenario in which she, I think there's a scenario in which you can live without letting Bob in or whatever, but she was in a situation where, given the combination of Bob's incentives and Leland's incentives and all of that, she wasn't gonna live. Um, but I'm not sure if that's like a I'm not sure if that's like a direct feature of the predicament. Put it that way.
yeah. Um, if Janie E's husband wasn't such a loser or a bum, would she have said we're living in a dark, dark age? Like if he was a great guy or something, would she
I
still
would say
would she,
no. I mean, look how much her impression of everything changes based
Hmm.
on where she ends up with Dougie. She says, "Yeah, I think probably not. That's probably a reflection of her marriage."
Yeah, I just think that's really fun to think about,
How
Are we
about okay?
living?
I'm going to ask you a question now. What do you think of
Sure.
the Janie E. Diane relationship or connection?
We know about Mike and Bob's relationship. How? Because Mike said something about it, yeah?
Right.
Do we know about it in any other way other than Mike saying something? I don't think so.
Only well, the more or less no. There's the dream. Cooper's dream. Bob says something about Mike, I think.
Okay, good answer. Good answer. Then
But
maybe
yeah,
you could.
I take your point. I take your point
Hmm.
as far as it applies to Janie and Diane, I guess. But
Y-
do you make anything of it?
Yeah, I don't think they're related.
Interesting. Do you
I
think
don't have,
that?
but I don't have any good reason for that.
Okay, yeah, I was gonna ask. Do you think that there's a reason that she would say that and it not be the case? Because
Yeah, I
John
had.
Thorne, I feel, builds a lot off of that, which is interesting, more than
Yes,
I would,
yeah,
honestly. I don't. When I listed off all the things Diane was, even knowing John's theory, it didn't really occur to me to say Janie E because they feel
mm.
kind of different. But I mean, so do her and Cooper, and still I connect them. So I don't know.
Yeah, I thought it through once and it connected, but or maybe somebody thought it through on my behalf and connected it for me, but I can't remember. But it just is, but something like there was some logical pieces that didn't make it made it very, very plausible that
There's a name
she was
thing.
kind of pulling this out of her ass like last second, sort of like
Oh, okay.
yeah, like it was kind of strategic. Yeah, she's my half sister. Yeah.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah.
That I never really thought about that it might not be that she might be lying
Hmm.
or
Probably.
telling a story that is not true. Say.
Yeah. How many meanings are there for the phrase the return that you could think of on the spot? So season 3 is also known as the return. What is that phrase referring to? Could you think of 5 or more?
It's okay. Let's see. Cooper's return to Twin Peaks, our return to the Twin Peaks, the show. I would have thought there were a ton, but now I'm not really. None others aren't coming to mind. I mean, those two are kind of rich enough that I almost feel like I don't need more. I mean, there's an ironic sense because we're not really returning to the Twin Peaks we knew before. It's quite different. I like the title. I mean, I know it was a Showtime thing that they didn't really choose, but I there was like a phase of like 2 or 3 months where it was like, Sabrina Sutherland put out a statement or something like, this was CBS's or Showtime's title. We're now referring to it as Twin Peaks season 3 or something. It's like, okay, everybody stop using the return. And then it was like after a few months, it was like, the return kind of works. And now I use it
okay.
all the time.
I didn't know that.
So.
Yeah.
I don't think she said like don't use it, but it was like, this isn't official. This is not the Lynch Frost way of referring to it. And we were all kind of like, oh, huh. Okay, well, I guess it's not the return. And then it was like, that's kind of the return.
Is Cooper programmed by the firemen? Is he just a good teammate? Is he coached by the firemen? None of the above. If he's programmed, is he some sort of tulpa, like that could be turned on and off? Are all these questions stupid? Any thoughts?
I was gonna say yes to all of them, and then you said, "Are they all stupid?" Sure, why not? I'll throw that in too. Yes to all of them. No. Yeah, I mean, it's funny with the Cooper stuff. It's like I kind of glide over it a little bit, where it's like this sort of mechanistic plot to find Judy or whatever the hell they're doing. I wouldn't say it doesn't interest me, but I don't quite make heads or tails of it, and it seems a little bit of a sideshow or MacGuffin for whatever else is going on in terms of identity and the passage of time and all this other stuff. It'd be fun to kind of I probably before I create the videos I'll go in a not that I have a ton of time, but if I'm going to stick to my timetable, but in the hours before I do it, I'd probably do some deep dives if I can find them on forums and stuff. Are you getting my connection okay? Because it's
okay,
yes. Good. And read about what people, if people have interesting reads of like this whole Judy mission that he's on, and the stuff that the fireman says to him at the beginning of the return, because it does it to me. I don't do you remember? Have you read some of these essays on like the return? Like there's one where it's like Cooper is activating Laura / Carrie as like the
bomb.
Canary. Yeah, she's like the bomb that's gonna blow up Judy and the Cage universe and all this stuff. And then there's like that one to me is one of the flatter ones. It doesn't really resonate with with what I see. Like I don't get the point of it. Like we already had Bob. Bob was the big evil. Like, oh, now we got a bigger evil. Like that's kind of a lame way to think of Judy for me. I'm more interested in what I've talked about with John Thorne is like the idea of her as some kind of representation of trauma or denial or whatever, like some kind of manifestation of something. But there's another one I find kind of interesting. I'm going off on a little bit of a side tangent here, but there's another one I find kind of interesting, which is like Cooper is actually Mike, and Mike is like a murderer, and this is all his Mulholland Drive-esque rationalization of it. I don't like it. I don't. I mean, I like its sort of thematic resonance. I don't like treat it as like I don't buy it to the extent that I would like buy anything about Cooper's story in that way, but like, to me, that one at least communicates something emotionally, whereas like Lara is the bomb in the Judy Cage universe. It's just kind of like, okay, I don't know. What does that leave me like on a psychological character level? Not much. I don't know.
Yeah, I suppose you're right. Artificial intelligence, broadly speaking, it's 2023. It's an interesting topic. What do you think a strong early AI interpretation of Twin Peaks would include? If you had to predict the first really good coherent artificial intelligence analysis or interpretation of Twin Peaks, anything popping to mind?
I think it would probably resemble like a cultural critic writing in like April 1990. Look at this wacky, strange thing with coffee and the vibes, and there it is. That's Twin Peaks.
Like a chat GPT.
Yeah, I don't think it. I don't think it would penetrate much deeper than that. A chat GPT or some kind of like visual thing, it would sort of catch on to those basic motifs. I think AI at this point in its development, and I don't know how or where it goes from here. It seems like it almost kind of reflects our most glib tendencies back at us. So I guess the most positive case for AI is like encourage it, like as a mirror showing us our own capacity for being shallow and challenge us to come up with something better.
It's interesting. Yeah, I don't know much about it, but I heard that it's like a lot of it is like something called like large language programming or something, where mostly it's functioning based on like an analysis of language modeling or like language patterns and predictions. And I think it'd be interesting if AI shifts away from language into other elements of communication, like if it wasn't just language based, if it was like, I don't know, intuition based or something. I don't know, that's just random. But like future iterations of AI might be interesting, because and I just think of David Lynch when I say that, because he's kind of notoriously has described himself as like not much of a language guy, or maybe that's like not his good language isn't like his optimal mode. And AI right now is very much, I think, like language driven. So it'd be interesting to see if it was driven by something else, what that would result in. Not really sure. I only thought of this because you were asking recently about apparently there's an AI sort of movie clip that reinterpreted I forget what it was.
They did Lord of the Rings as a Wes Anderson movie.
Yeah, pretty nutty.
And I literally don't understand like how it works. Like I truly, in my conception of it, like somebody like speaks into a tin can and they're like, make a Wes Anderson Lord of the Rings. And like a person is on the other end pretending that they're a computer and like, I will do this, and then just does it as a person would do it. Like, I don't understand where the computer enters into it, really, to be honest.
I think
it seems like it's a lot of programming.
It's massive
People are
programming.
Like freaking out that like this is doing it by itself, but it's like, is it? I don't know.
Yeah, it's massive programming. But it is interesting that I believe we already, like, you could have like a virtual friend that can sort of shape shift, like as you're hanging out or as you're communicating, could become, I don't know, theoretically you could have a friend that becomes all cast members of Twin Peaks. During one little four-way to the park.
It's like the Joy character in Blade Runner 2049, basically.
Yeah, it's crazy.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. That's a
Yeah,
good point.
I feel like there's two ways of looking at AI. One is the sort of nightmare apocalypse scenario that somehow it achieves like self-awareness and basically supplants humanity. And becomes this whatever that is. The other way to look at it, if you're going to tell a story about it or something, is like the impact it has on people, almost like a Rorschach test, where it's like the AI is just blindly doing its thing, and people kind of interpret it a certain way or do whatever, and it's all really them reflecting back on themselves based on this external encounter or whatever.
Yeah,
And
like
that
the Janie E stuff. It's a
right.
dark world.
Yeah,
Hey, but
Dougie
you know
is
what?
the
Maybe it's not
AI,
so dark right
exactly.
then. I love the delivery man from the Mitchum Brothers delivery man, like the head guy who brings the gym
Yeah,
set with
yeah.
him. But that's neither here nor there.
There was somebody on I think it was what was it? Fire Talk with Me, one of many, many, many Twin Peaks podcasts over the years, where they never covered the season 2 finale until right before the return. So it took like 3 years, and then they're like, "Here we are, we're finally back." And then they covered all of season 3, and then they never covered the season 3 finale. They did it again, and this time, of course, they never came back. So, anyways,
Interesting.
one of the hosts like knew that actor and was like, "Oh, he's great." Blah blah blah.
Okay.
That's all I remember
Yeah,
about
that guy's cool. His
that.
name is like I wrote it down. He has the coolest name. This Israeli guy. So Sarah Palmer bites some guy's neck off or whatever. There's no blood on her chin. Diane gets shot in a chair, disappears.
Yeah.
There's no blood on the chair. There's like a lot of stuff that happens with no blood. Kind of weird.
And then when you do see blood, it's like
Well, there's no
very.
blood. There's no blood in this Sam and Tracy. You know when they get like the whole forensics, they
Uh-huh.
don't find any blood.
It really?
Yeah, I
Oh
believe
wow.
that's aside from the actual
Yeah.
broken heads.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. That's all I
But
remember.
Tammy says like there's nothing. There's like no trace.
They sucked the blood out or something. Yeah. It's funny how Lynch's like head injuries than this. It's just like he's just like cleanly slices a portion of the head, like it goes through the eye, and the eye is like intact. Like it's like,
Yeah.
what is this? This is so weird.
Sarah's watching a boxing match on a big loop.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, that's really cool and really weird in my opinion. Can you explain that scene to me?
There's a great Blue Rose magazine article on that's talking about the actual fight and like gives all
Ah,
this context for it. And I don't think Lynch was using it for that. I think he just found some footage and grabbed it and threw it in, just sort of like he Googled old school hip hop beats and literally put in the first song he found onto the soundtrack. But yeah, so that's interesting. I mean, it's not a particularly original insight, but I think it just has something to do with the cyclical, the cycle she's stuck in, basically, where it's just a further kind of manifestation of that, just the endless kind of repetition, getting up, getting her drink, pouring the Bloody Mary, smoking her 20,000th cigarette as the fight goes on and on. There's obviously something going on in terms of violence that she's watching. Like the first scene, it's this nature documentary with the leopards or whatever ripping apart the wildebeest or whatever it is. I do love the correspondence. I can't remember who originally brought this idea up, but the correspondence between Sarah sitting there watching this violence in the box right at the same time, supposedly or possibly, that Judy is smashing through the box at the kids in New York, further or experiment, who knows?
yeah.
Who knows what that is? That's interesting. I think I've been watching the series again recently, like actually, not just fragments of scenes for stuff I'm working on, but actually like episode by episode. And it's interesting. Like it does feel like they really are. And I think, again, this is probably more Mark Frost. Like there really is a coherent thread through the whole series of like Sarah experiment, Judy jumping man. Like there's something concrete going on there, And it's funny, like when you hear that interview I did with Martha Nachemson, like she hates the idea that the little girl is Sarah.
Mm.
I kind of get it, but it doesn't really bother me that much. And I think some of the stuff Frost says, you're like, okay, this is definitely just you saying this. Like, this isn't something
Mm.
Lynch is buying. But the way he describes the Sarah thing is like, he's almost like asserting, like, this was Lynch and I. This wasn't just me, Like the way he talks about, oh, we wanted you to figure out who it was and this and that. It's like, it seems to me like, even though Lynch presents it pretty ambiguously in the context of the show itself, that they discussed that this was Sarah in the writing process.
Yeah.
Seems like it. And I kind of like that idea. It gives it some. Now, I don't know what it says in terms of Sarah and Judy and all that. Like the final dossier version of it isn't quite satisfying for me. Of like just these two demons inhabited these two parents of this girl who was a goddess sent down from outer space or whatever. It doesn't particularly add anything in that sense, but I like the idea that Sarah has there's a spirit that corresponds to whatever's going on in Sarah's psyche, put it that way.
Thank you. That's interesting. I believe, I don't want to get into this now, but I'm pretty sure you were part of an episode of some show that got into Sarah Palmer at great length. Is that correct?
Yeah, that was Cream Corn in the Universe.
Yeah,
Actually.
man.
That was my episode of that.
That was super cool. That was really great. But
that was he suggested a couple characters and I was like, yeah, that's interesting. But to tell you the truth, Diane and Sarah are the ones that I'm most interested in. He had somebody else coming on for Diane. And it had somebody come on to discuss Sarah, but specifically the Judy aspect of it.
Yeah.
And so we touched on that again, but it was sort of more Sarah holistically.
If I could catch one episode, one discussion of one character anywhere, and I've never seen it, it would be Mrs. Tremont / Chalfont. That's the one character I would really just love to hear people get into.
Yeah,
but
I feel like I've heard more about. Oh, sorry, I was just gonna say, I feel like more people have talked about the grandson than her.
Yeah, she's intriguing to me.
Yeah.
I'm gonna have to go in a little bit, but I have a fair amount of questions. Can we do 30-second rounds?
Yeah, go for it. I'll stick to the clock this time.
Who faces more complications in Twin Peaks, the characters or us, the viewers?
Us, I guess, because we're collectively, we're getting all of their difficulties collectively, whereas they only have their own individual ones, maybe.
If Mike / Gerard, if his tattoo was on a different part of his body and he had to remove it, would anything be different? Like, is it the fact that it's an arm? Is that essential, or is that just not essential?
I mean, I think the idea is the removal of a limb, but that's the most kind of logical way to go with it, I think.
Maybe I am the foot, or I am the hand doesn't have the same.
Yeah, I won't go any further with that.
that gum you like is going to come back in style. Are there like canonical interpretations of that line? You've been around a lot longer than I have.
That
Does that just mean like the stuff you like to chew on?
that
That's kind of how I always took gum.
what that line means is that eventually a piece of chewing gum is going to be recast as me on top of a tree. That's all I got for you.
Yeah, I always thought it was like stuff to chew on, but I think are there any like classic or sort of canonical interpretations of any large or small element of this show that you were drawn to, that you lived with, that you have abandoned, or that you don't really buy but still like, or just any of those things?
I think
I know that's kind of a wide open question, maybe too wide open, but
the Owl Cave ring being something that just transports you to the lodge, I never found that interesting, and I feel like the return leaned into that pretty heavily. So that was like a little bit of a disappointment for me, because it's like, to me, the most interesting thing in Firewalk with me is how the ring relates to knowledge and power and things like that. And they didn't really play with that much in the return. It was more like, hey, put this on your finger and now you're in the red room.
do you think the red room, speaking of the red room, is the red room Cooper's subconscious? Is it something else?
Um, I think at this point they've done too much with it to just have it be Cooper's subconscious, unless all of Twin Peaks is somehow his, psychic playground. Too many different people have had experiences or encounters there. I like the idea that that's his particular manifestation of the underworld of Twin Peaks, but I don't think it's totally plausible in narrative terms at this point.
Do you think it looks and feels a certain way because of him, or does it just look, is that a place that looks and feels a certain way regardless of who the inhabitants are or who the visitors are?
Yeah, I mean, like I said, I like the idea that it would be because of him, but I don't think it. I don't really buy it at this point. There's too much other stuff suggesting it's its own space.
So it is its own. You said you think it's its own thing.
Yeah, I
So,
mean, I think that's what we're. I think
yeah.
that's the emphasis of the show. Yeah, that it has its own independent existence, to the extent that anything in Twin Peaks, maybe all of it's Cooper's dream or whatever. But if it's not, then I don't think the Red Room is particularly so.
Um, how does who gets to be a doppelganger, and who doesn't?
I guess theoretically everybody would have a doppelganger, but we only see certain ones. I do find it strange that the spirits have the doppelgangers. That, if I had to guess, I would say that's one of those things Lynch has never quite figured out or had anyone else figure out. It just felt right to him, so he did it. Here's the contacts, put them in, Michael J. Anderson, and
Hmm.
we'll go from there.
Um, the uh, Jimmy Scott is singing a song, and it's a nice song. Is he playing Jimmy Scott, or is he some character?
A little bit of both, kind of like Julie Cruz, I think.
He sings "I will see you, you will see me." Um, who are the pronouns there? Like, who's the I and the you and the me, in your opinion?
Let's see. I mean, it just feels, honestly, it's not that interesting of an answer, but it feels like the spirits and Cooper in this particular case communicating there. I don't know that it would be fun to be like, that's Laura singing through him or something, but probably not.
Yeah,
Doesn't need to be for it to work.
yeah. And I'm not trying to I'm not trying to be clever or like.
We can't always be. Sometimes we have to just. I mean, what's the phrase from Twin Peaks? I mean it like it is, like it
Yeah,
sounds.
yeah.
I'm speaking
This,
plainly, and without
yes.
what's that from? I'm speaking plain. Oh, that's Mulholland Drive, right? The cowboy.
Hmm.
Yeah.
I love it. I love it. I mean it like it is. I'm speaking plainly, and meanwhile, it's like, what the hell is going on? It's so taunting. It's great.
Yes.
Um. Uh. Uh. Did you know that Wyndham Earl takes Annie into the Grove on Easter? Did you ever hear about that?
I feel like yeah, because I looked a lot at the dates of stuff that things happened on. So yeah, yeah, that would make sense, I guess. Yeah, March 28th, 1989.
I would assume that's just happenstance, coincidence. Like there's no
I don't know. Well, they write a lot
back
about like
from the
the
dead.
passion play and stuff in the Access Guide book.
Mm.
Like they make a big deal out of that. Like the Bookhouse Boys do a passion play and this and that. And it's like very random. So it seems like they might have actually realized at a certain point that like they would set this on Easter because of that, but I'm not sure.
Yeah, Easter's always interesting because you get the dead, but yet I
Yeah.
live type thing.
And it's not about the bunny.
Yeah, exactly. And there are some bunnies on the TV in that I think it's the boxing scene, which is and I
What do you
think
mean there's bunnies on the TV?
yeah, you know how Sarah's watching TV.
Mm-hmm.
There's like two bunnies there on the TV stand, and
Oh, really? I never
yeah,
noticed that.
and there's like a big bowl of what I have to. There's like a big bowl of cream corn next to her. And it's just interesting. Um, um, maybe we'll close it out with. Yeah. What have you learned from David Lynch and Mark Frost as a creative person, as a writer, as any way you want to take it? Maybe that's not a fair question.
No, I mean it is. I think I learned the importance and the power of storytelling in a context where you don't necessarily know the story you're telling. Like you're following a thread rather than um like charting it out ahead of time.
Hmm. Neat. Oh, I have to ask one more question. Sorry. Um, do you think Garland Briggs was born in Italy? Because he talks about some big palazzo where where he was in fact born and raised.
I'm doing the chronology here. I'm thinking you know what? His dad was a soldier in Italy in 1944 when they were invading, taken over 43, 44. Met an Italian woman, married her, came back to the U.S. with Garland. So there you go. The timing that uh the years work out.
Yeah, I think deep down in his deepest
Yeah.
vision,
He was born in
he wants to be Italian.
he was born in the Allied occupied palace of Mussolini.
There you go. Perfect. Um, I actually have one question, 1 minute or less. From the jump from season 1 to 2, from season 2 to Fire Walk with Me, and then from the movie to season 3. What were the key, in your opinion? What were some of the steps forward that were made during each of those jumps, or artistically or any other way? Innovations, really, whatever you want to say.
Season 1 to season 2, it's the going from something that was sort of like this quick, fast, lightning in a bottle, phenomenon, to something that is going to just keep going deeper. And obviously that, didn't work so well with the ratings, but in terms of its artistic quality, I think that's a crucial moment. Season 2 to Fire Walk with Me, there's a shift from like a sort of a removal and a distance to an absolute immersion. I mean, visually so. Like, let's think of some of the wide shots in the finale, and then you open Fire Walk with Me, like way zoomed in on TV static. There's like a sense in the finale of like this sort of wrathful God raining down his plagues upon Twin Peaks, which is funny because obviously in that context, the wrathful God is David Lynch, but actually the only scenes at least outside of the Black Lodge, the only scenes that he added was like the happy scene at the diner. Like the writers wrote all the negative stuff happening to everybody, but it still feels like David Lynch like sending a meteor shower on Twin Peaks. And then in Fire Walk with Me, though, it's pure empathy, And even in that first half hour where we're a little more distance with Chet and Stanley, there's like a free flowing, or Sam Stanley, there's a free flowing quality to it, like a looseness in the camera work and stuff that you already feel like you're getting a little more immersed in something. From Fire Walk with Me to The Return, it's more, you're going from, I think, it's sort of similar, like a backwards movement, like from season 2 to Fire Walk with Me, where you're going from more distance to up close. I think you're getting some distance again in a more sort of Apollonian way, like you're sort of looking down coolly upon all of this stuff happening from a position where you had been totally inside of it with Fire Walk with Me. So that's my impression of all of those junctures.
Thanks, Joel. Have you written a book accidentally without knowing it?
Yeah, I've probably written several books, several movies, and several albums. I don't know. of spoken word albums.
How do you feel when I ask that question?
It makes me think of the Pauline Kael quote where somebody asked her, why have you written your autobiography? And she said, "Oh, I have." It's like, what am I gonna write? Well, I've written my books, I guess.
Yeah, that's cool. Would you see any value in like collating it like into an actual bounded thing, or
Financially maybe,
Hmm.
but in terms of presentation, I don't know. It seems like if I was to write a book at some point, it would be something new. It would be hard to it'd be hard to see my way toward putting the effort toward like making a book of stuff that I had written already. But I don't know. I mean, people have done that, so
Yeah,
self-printed or whatever. I don't know. Yeah, it could be interesting, but it doesn't seem very necessary to me, at least at this point.
yeah, I understand. Um, the I don't know if I have to put it, if I do something with this and I'm sure I'm going to publish it somewhere. We had to give it a title. Do you have any ideas? Usually I figure that out after I like write up the descriptions. For, I try to like timestamp it, but I don't know about a 4-hour one. I don't I don't know what the timestamps would be. Do you have any titles coming to mind?
Joel and Anthony's Excellent Adventure. No, I don't know.
Okay. Can we keep in touch?
Oh yeah, definitely. I
Yeah.
mean, this was fun.
I hope so. Yeah. I think it's past my bedtime, but I don't really care.
Are you
I drank a pot of coffee, so
are you in the Midwest?
no, I'm in New Jersey.
Oh, okay. Same time zone as me. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, I didn't realize that. Okay.
Yeah. New Hampshire.
Sweet.
Yeah.
Yep. Maybe we'll catch up sometime.
The two news or two of many news.
Yeah, really. Oh, do you know my trivia question? Who is Dale Doolittle?
Dale Doolittle. Or is it
I tried to
is that
create
is that the doctor's first name or
no. I'll give you a hint.
is it to do with the colonel in the army or whatever?
Not bad. Not bad. The hint is Guam. That's hint number one,
okay.
Guam. And hint number 2 is Pete.
Yeah. So
Martell.
that's the story he tells
Very good.
about when he's opening the mystery box, right?
Very good. Yeah.
So when he tells that story, in my mind, I was thinking he was referring to the officer, Doolittle, who I can't remember who he was, Air Force or what. But I don't think so. I think he's referring to 2 other enlisted men, which also I gotta say,
twins.
Poor Jack Nance. The implication is that in 1989, Pete's like 65 years old. That man was like 43.
Yeah.
But he had aged quite a bit in the 80s from Eraserhead.
He lived a couple lives, I think.
He lived many, many lives. Yeah, absolutely.
All right, man. The scary part is that we could probably just ramble for
just keep going with the
twice
list.
as long. Yeah, with the stupid lists. But it's fun though.
It is, yeah.
You think anybody else would ever want to join in for the speed round stuff?
I don't know. I mean, have you done it with other people?
No.
No.
Nah.
You can throw it out as like a possibility and like give them the option of saying no, I guess. But yeah, I enjoy it. I enjoy the challenge. Although sometimes tonight it sort of detoured off the speed.
Yeah, it happens.
It does.
It is I can't stop. You just said speed and it made me think of the waiter. Is he so slow because it's the waiting room? And is he a waiter because it's the waiting room? Are these all just silly puns and nothing else?
I mean, I would never put it past David Lynch to be punning about something. So yeah, maybe.
And what does meanwhile mean?
It's
Maybe that's the wrong phrasing of my question.
I'll see you again in 25 years.
Yeah.
Meanwhile.